Department, Chairman of Statutory Boards and Authorities, Chairman of State Enterprises, Chief Executive Officers and Heads of Private Sector Organizations, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be given the opportunity to bring welcome remarks on behalf of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago at the Spotlight on Budget 2020, as it brings to a culmination the delivery by this P&M administration of 5 years of national budgets for Trinidad and Tobago. And whilst I was reflecting on what would be appropriate welcoming remarks, I'd ask that you all allow me to share a personal perspective. Because at the end of a 5-year period, and having delivered the budget so ably through our Minister of Finance, you always have a lot of commentary in the national landscape. And this government is always following the commentary. And we are not in any way afraid or apprehensive as to the listening, and in particular to constructive criticism. But you see, this is a perspective, and it is a perspective I did not fully appreciate 5 years ago before entering government. It is always interesting to hear each sector of society's agenda, because every sector of society and every individual has their own wish list, has their own perspective of how Trinidad and Tobago should be. But I can tell you, having been a participant in the government for the last 5 years, you listen to everyone and you're never going to please everyone. And having a conversation with a good friend within this week, the concept of socialism came up. And it is not that it is a socialist government or that we believe in socialism, but at the government level, it is your responsibility to do what is best for the whole of society. So you may have the manufacturers clamoring in one direction, sectors of the business community which is then broken down, the financial sector and other sectors asking for different areas. But the perspective I'd like you to appreciate today, as we open ourselves up to share our thoughts, to share our perspectives from the government, and then, amazingly, to open ourselves up to questioning, and that level of transparency that has continued throughout the term of office of this government, starting, as I recalled, in 2016 when we had the first spotlight on the economy and followed up by a spotlight on energy sector. The perspective I'd like you to consider as we go into today's proceedings is how difficult it must be to listen to everybody, the energy sector, the financial sector, the manufacturing sector, the other elements of the business sector, everybody's perspective being the most important to them. And then you also have to look after the rest of society. And those are the ways a responsible and a proper government make decisions. And I stand here today without fear of contradiction that that is exactly what this government has done very adequately and properly for the last 5 years, balancing all of the interests. And I will end with my welcoming remarks with this perspective, because a lot of you here, if not the vast majority, have been involved in business. Imagine coming into office and having lost 90% of your revenue on your first day at work. And that is what this government came in 2015. 90% of the revenue that was derived from the energy sector had evaporated before we even entered office. So anyone who has any business acumen, even a household and a head of a household who has to run their household, think about it. For every $100 you had before, you now have to make do with 10. And that is what this government and administration faced. We've worked hard in the energy sector in correcting and righting and balancing that ship, because despite all of the conversation about diversification, it would not happen overnight. You had to stabilize the ship with your rudder, which is the energy sector. That is what was done. Throughout the rest of today, you will get detailed reports, starting with the Honorable Prime Minister, who has been the captain at the steering of the ship, the Minister of Finance, who has had to be our representative in stabilizing the economy. And I'd like to say, from my personal perspective, for whatever it's worth, that was done in an admirable way and very adequately and successfully over the last 5 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am certain today will be a lot of stimulating conversation, and we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate with the government. And let this be another milestone in the good governance of Trinidad and Tobago. And I am happy to be part of history that for the first time, once again, a government has brought itself to the population of Trinidad and Tobago in a most open and transparent manner to have open conversation with you, no other than from the leadership and the Minister of Finance, and a very carefully chosen panel to give their perspectives on our economy as we go forward into 2020. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that today's proceedings are equally stimulating. Thank you. At this time, we will be addressed by Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, someone who the population of Trinidad and Tobago gave a mandate to lead our beloved country, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in September 2015. And as you've heard him say to the country on so many occasions, within a few days of being in office as the Prime Minister, being told by the Minister of Finance that 3 days, money for 3 days left in the Treasury. The Prime Minister has had the longest history out of the parliamentarians sitting in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. He's the most experienced, and he has led the country from September 2015. He needs no further introduction. He has served in a number of ministries, as you're well aware. And I'd invite at this time the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Young, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, my other cabinet colleagues, all members of Parliament, permanent secretaries, mayors, the chairman, and members of boards, our specially invited guests from the private sector, heads of organizations, members of the media, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I was on my way to breakfast. I was told that breakfast was going to be served, and I was on time for breakfast, and then I got a notification, don't come before 9:45, so I was uninvited to the breakfast. So if I say anything that does not meet with your approval, I just apply it to the fact that I was not. But I don't normally have breakfast, so they haven't done me anything. But ladies and gentlemen, this event, we thought, is a useful undertaking for us as a people to continue to make efforts to understand our circumstance. Because one of the additional difficulties that we could place on ourselves is to not have a clear picture of exactly where we are and where we are going and what we have to take us there, what vehicles we have to take us there. Today we will confine ourselves to the elements of management of the budgeting exercise and the strands of the fabric of our financial resources that we have to take us through the next, not just the next 12 months, because what we do in the budget now has consequences going forward well beyond the financial year. But I simply want to reiterate, particularly for those who see the budget as an exercise that should be able to solve all the problems. The budget is one stop along a journey. And basically, a budget is really a wish list. It's an estimation of your revenues that you are likely to have available to you. And in the event that you acquire those revenues, how you will spend it. And in that conversation, you make certain allocations. But it's all rooted in whether, in fact, you are able to realize the revenues that should come your way and be available during the next 12 months. Because even if you make the allocations in the Parliament, notwithstanding the cases that can be made for greater allocation here or to place on the list new line items for things that should be done, if the revenue is not realized, then the allocation is simply that, a wish. And that is why we need to regard our circumstance in the understanding of what our revenue situation is. Some people figure that we too often mention this situation with respect to the loss of revenue, but everything starts with that. We have had, as a government, a very unpleasant assignment. And I've heard a lot of commentators very quickly speak about an absence of policy. In virtually any area, you would hear commentators, oh, there's no policy here, and there's no policy there, and there's no policy there. In this period of governance, the policy making has largely been directed by the circumstances that we are dealing with. And by that I mean, we are compelled to do certain things if we are to survive, to maintain, and to grow. One of the things that we were compelled to do as a new government in 2015 was to significantly reduce government expenditure. That is not a very pleasant exercise for a government, especially against a background where the general sentiment in the country is that the government has huge responsibilities to discharge to the population, and the economic reality is that the government is the driver of not all but most of what goes on in the country. So therefore, if we find ourselves, as we have been, not able to fund from the government what we have become accustomed to, then we have to face the reality that the government's first policy imperative was to reduce expenditure, meaning that some things that would otherwise have been funded could not or would not be funded. Those persons who are going to be affected by that will not be out front waving a flag for the government, and certainly will not be any cheerleaders of those who have done the reduction. You don't get any kudos for that. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't say that. Last night, one commentator did in fact congratulate the Minister of Finance for having successfully reduced the national expenditure down from the $62 billion of 2015 to an estimated $52 billion in 2019. That is what we have accomplished. And we had to do that, not because we are stingy or we are wicked, or that we are PNM fighting the UNC. It is because the money just was not there. And it would have been crazy to try to apportion monies at the level of $62 billion and try to run the country with a national expenditure for the years 2016, 17, 18, going forward at the level at which we had gone. Knowing then that the revenues, the actual revenue side of the budget would have been in the approximation of at best $42 or $41 billion. What we have done, and this was again being compelled to do, is to try to hold the gains that we had made, slow down the accelerations that we were funding in some areas, by making that reduction in expenditure without collapsing the economy, without crashing the country, and just simply being straightforward, sensible. You would have heard in the early parts, 2016, 2017, one of the words that was used very commonly by detractors of the effort is collapse. Very many persons, aspirants in office in Trinidad and Tobago, spoke very confidently that the economy has collapsed, so it's going to collapse. In fact, some people were predicting that the government would collapse because the circumstances were so dire that some people didn't think that we could have responded to a reduction in revenues as we have faced and not in fact face a collapse with it. We look at the revenues in 2016, 2015 from our major revenue stream, and we saw a $16 billion inflow. This Minister of Finance, on that same line item of receipts, got less than $500 million. So in a 12-month period, our fortunes on that line item in the budget had moved from 16 billion to less than $500 million. And we still had the claims being made on the government to do what they had become accustomed to. Now clearly, the government had to listen, but had to act by reducing expenditure. And this is what the Ministry of Finance has done, because that was the policy imperative. Now, the other side of it is that you had to do what had to be done to improve revenues. That was a compelling instruction from the circumstance. Well, how does one improve revenues in a situation like that? Well, immediately, one of the things the Minister of Finance did, he had a slight adjustment upwards on taxation. There was a small amount of adjustment on the tax side where the banks, which were among the most prosperous of our efforts, was asked to pay a bit more. Those who were earning over $1 million, those who were earning over $1 million were asked to pay a little bit more. But that was a compelling instruction from the circumstance. At the base also, the Minister of Finance allowed those persons who were earning $6,000 and less per month to be tax-free. And we made some upward adjustments at the base of the earning pyramid. And of course, we had to look around to see where we were being wasteful and to cut out waste, to wage war on corruption. And if there was anybody owing us any money, we tried to collect that. And of course, if we had assets that could, some of which could have been sold in the marketplace, we sold some of that. These were instructions from the circumstance. We went after the CLICO monies. We sold some FCB shares. And of course, we did some significant reductions. You will remember in the first budget, soon after the first budget was passed, there was an instruction from the government across the public service to make a 7% cut. And that was done. because we just did not have the revenues to support the budget even as passed in October of 2015. And of course, we had to borrow because the actual revenue that was available to us, even if we had got all that we could have done with the best of effort on the revenue side, we could not get anywhere close to the figure of 50 billion from the actual revenues that we were picking up during that year. So we had to continue to borrow. And we were borrowing against a situation where the overdraft management was where the problem was. Days and weeks, we were managing the overdraft at 90%, 95%, with significant payments to be made. I could tell you this. I was abroad once, and the Minister of Finance, after he had done all that he could have done, had to call me and tell me, it looks as though we're not going to pay salaries this month. Payment of salaries to public servants was in jeopardy. The money just was not there. But we had to come up with ideas to get past that hurdle. The checks were made, checks were honored, and we got past that. We have been and we will continue to have to manage our debt and our revenue to be able to do what has to be done. But policy-wise, we set ourselves a target not to be beyond a certain range of debt liabilities, and I'm pleased to announce that the Minister of Finance has been able to keep us under that 65% debt to GDP ratio, which for a country that has gone into where we had gone and where we were operating, to have accomplished that is no mean feat. And of course, we were getting advice from a lot of people who were very familiar with some of our circumstances. And one of the earliest pieces of advice we got was, listen, if you don't have the Trinidad and Tobago dollars to meet your liabilities, just devalue the currency and let the US dollar earning give you more Trinidad and Tobago dollars, problem solved. That advice came to us from very many quarters, some of it from the private sector, some of it from academia. But the government took the position that if we took that option, the effect that that will have on the country as a whole, particularly the masses of the population who are in the lower half of the earning pyramid, would be devastating. So we decided, by policy, to adjust slightly, and the Minister of Finance established that he will defend the currency up to 6.85 to a US dollar, but not to have a 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 devaluation to give a mathematical solution. That was a policy decision taken by the government, and to date, it has worked reasonably well. Of course, there are demands for foreign exchange, but foreign exchange has to be earned before it could be spent. So the comment that I just saw in response to this budget, that there was no treating with the availability of foreign exchange, it misses the point that we just can't go making foreign exchange available because somebody wants to spend it. We have to manage the foreign exchange availability to ensure that we do have foreign exchange to do the needful, to pay our public debt, to buy medicine for the hospitals, and we have to prioritize. So unfortunately, there isn't enough foreign exchange to give everybody who wants and how much they want. But as a country, we are still in a relatively decent position with respect to the availability of foreign exchange to run the national business. And of course, we had liabilities. Liabilities is to honor the contracts that you've entered into. One of the contracts that this government had to honor was a contract to public servants costing $5 billion back pay that the government was contracted to pay. If you think that there's negative vibe in this country and rah-rah in this country, let the government not have paid that back pay to public servants. and you would have known what would have happened in Trinidad and Tobago. Because the public servants would have demanded that they be paid the money that the government is contracted to pay them. Policy, the government took the position that we'll borrow the money, we'll pay the public servants, but we have to understand that if we've done that, public servants have to understand that the government is at its limit in terms of availability of funds to pay towards public servants, but we pay that $5 billion. And we also took a policy decision that because the government is so important in sustaining employment in the country, in the public service, that we will not use as a policy reduction in the public service as a response to the reduction in the revenue side. That's a policy decision. Of course, if we had been an IMF candidate, that decision could not have been made in that way. We would have been forced to make significant reductions, and of course, that would have reflected itself in significant increases in unemployment. But we took the decision to keep that framework, and of course, supporting the employment levels, where today the unemployment level in Trinidad and Tobago is up at the 1.2%, something like that. But a lot of that is because the government supports a significant part of the labor force by programs that are designed especially to keep people employed. So there's a huge employment support system funded by the state, which reflects itself in that low unemployment level. Had that policy not been taken, a lot of people who earn a meal or earn a living would have been on the unemployment list, and the figure would not have been 1.2. Might have been double digits, might have been 15%, 18%. There are Caribbean territories and countries worldwide where a 20% unemployment or a 15% unemployment is par for the course. So when you hear about no policy and you hear about loss of jobs, you have to take it in the context of who is speaking and what they're talking about. The government has not laid off a single gazetted public servant in response to the loss of revenue. We have not renewed some contracts for contract workers in areas where they were either not priority on the jobs that they were doing, or in that situation, as we have to cut the expenditure from 62 billion to 52 billion, some people literally lost their jobs in the contract side of things. But gazetted public servants have not been touched. And of course, we had to very aggressively, as an item of policy, deliberately try to get more value for money. We have to ensure that we get the benefit of competition. You know, during World War II, before the British had got the old destroyers from the Americans, the German U-boats were marauding across the Atlantic and sinking British ships at will. The Germans called that the happy time. 2010 to 2015 in Trinidad and Tobago for contractors was the happy time. We had to get value for money. Let me give you one example. Curab interchange, same interchange that is being built there now. In fact, what is being built there now has a little extra on it, because I think there's a bit of an extra lane of road on it, other than what was being built. Contract was tendered, it's identified, about to be awarded. And that was being awarded for $300 million more than what is being built for now. That is what the happy time meant. So we've been out to tender. We opened the process. It's no longer very secure and special treatment. And we have been getting better values for the work and the services being provided. Another example, Caribbean Airlines. Caribbean Airlines was losing $600+ million in the last 8 years. 2010, and this is before the fuel subsidy applied to their accounts. 2010, 61 million. 2011, 87 million. 2012, 196 million. 2013, 70 million. 2014, 62 million. 2015, 39 million. 2016, 82 million. And all that is US dollars. We had to deal with that. By 2017, Caribbean Airlines losses on that line item was 24 million. And 2018, a profit of 4 million. These are the imperatives. We had to do that. The airline is operating now, and black is appearing on its books for the first time because we are doing things differently. Now, we had to cut the fuel subsidy because we were subsidizing fuel in this country to the tune of billions of dollars a year. We come to a situation now where the money just wasn't available, and even if money was available, question, is that the best way to spend that money given what we have to spend money on? So the government took the policy decision that we will reduce, aiming to eliminate the fuel subsidy. Well, I need not tell you how that was received in some quarters, because it was felt that we had taken away somebody's birthright and we had been ridiculous and whatever. But the bottom line is, we were spending money on fuel use, money that we require to spend elsewhere and money that we did not have. I have not seen any reduction in the traffic. What I do see are the boatloads of cars still coming into the country on a monthly basis. But the priority of medicine for the hospital or fuel being burnt at the traffic jam, the government had to cut the fuel. We still carry $1 billion in subsidy because when the last cut was done in the fuel, the price of oil was at a level where the subsidy would have been quite significantly reduced. But as the price rises, it's now in the mid-50s. I think the Ministry of Finance is still facing $1 billion bill for the fuel subsidy. So we have not eliminated it, but we have reduced it considerably. But given our circumstance, that was a policy decision that had to be done. Another big issue is petrotrim. Of course, there's the emotive attachment to petrotrim, but most of what is said by who speak the most about it totally disregard the accounts. Petrotrim in the last few years, as the financial accounts have been made available recently, Petrotrim had lost in the last few years $16 billion. The last write-off forced by the new accounting arrangements where the company was forced to take its losses in 2016. Was it 2018? It was $5 billion written off in 1 year. And as we assess the company for what best can we do going forward in the years ahead, what the prospects were was a $2 billion a year loss going forward, best. That was the best that we could have seen. Now, given what we had on the national balance sheet, could we really have taken on our own company and support it with the prospect of losing $2 billion going forward? And that was the best case. It could have been worse. So, the policy, as another imperative, Something just had to be done. So we restructured the company. And we are in the process of doing that. But we could report, as the Minister of Finance did, that the gap has now been closed to the tune of 2.4 billion, because we no longer carry the $2 billion prospect of loss. And one of the subsidiaries is making a profit of 400 million. So we've gone to the place of earning revenue as against losing money. And those are the things that we have had to do. Now, we talk about job creation, because job creation is important. There's a purpose behind governance. There's a purpose behind doing all of this. And it's just to make people have an opportunity to live and to live decently. How, in that circumstance, you create jobs? We already have a $4.8 billion handout ministry, because one of the things we did by policy, given the circumstances we were facing, was to not eliminate any significant part of the social safety net. In fact, we made some improvements in some of those areas. And the Ministry of Social Development carries an allocation of $4.7 billion, with a bit of addition to that. Almost $5 billion in the end, social support. But we have to create opportunity for employment. So even as we were short on the revenue side, even as we were suppressing expenditure and borrowing, we still had to carry a development program. The development program is largely funded by borrowings. But that expenditure to carry a development program is where the jobs were created. And we did so largely by public sector construction. Public sector construction is the fastest way to create jobs. And also, most people who are without jobs are people who, if jobs are available in the construction sector, they could use those jobs. So, in all the years, 2016, 2017, 2018, with all the difficulty, we were carrying about approximately a $3 to $5 billion construction program. And what did we do? We set about to complete the unfinished projects first. There were a number of unfinished projects. Some of them was on the ground untouched for 5 to 7 years. Some were 2 years. For example, the Diego Martin Sporting Complex was untouched for 5 years. We finished that. The Brian Lara Stadium was untouched. We finished that. If you are going down this evening to support the team, carry some good vibes. The stadium is being used for CPL finals, and we'll be able to negotiate that for a while. But we finished that stadium. And we had a number of hospitals on the drawing board or on the ground, and we set about to complete them. So today we are on the verge of receiving the completed Point Fortin Hospital, the Arima Hospital, and we had a number of heritage buildings, buildings bequeathed to us at independence, or buildings that we acquired post-independence. The Parliament had not been in the Red House for how many years? The Red House had fallen apart and could not be used as a parliament. Whitehall was falling apart. Stallmeyer Castle, Millfleur. As a matter of fact, when I visited Millfleur with the engineers on my team, the general sentiment was that Millfleur could not be saved. It had gone too far. Today I can report to you that a lot of employment was created by the expenditure to save those buildings. And Stallmeyer Castle is complete, Whitehall is complete, and the Parliament is virtually complete, and Millfleur is being saved. If we could not do that, ladies and gentlemen, and I would say it again, we were not worthy of our independence. We spent on those buildings, and a lot of employment was created for those specific purposes. And of course, We also spent on expanding the country's infrastructure, our road network. When we came into office, the highway to Point Fortin was a stalled project. We had already spent $5 billion on it. It had to be completed. We are completing it now for another $2.something billion. And that is our national infrastructure completion. And of course, policy-wise, this government has taken a policy decision to bring the eastern part of Trinidad into the national economy and make available for growth in the future all that is available on the eastern side of the country. So we are building infrastructure going east and to the north. So these are decisions of policy that we've taken. And of course, we had to go to the source of our revenue, notwithstanding the conversations about the absence of diversification. We had to go to the source of our revenue because we are hungry today. We are hungry today. We had to seek what was available to feed us today. And that took us to the energy sector. We grew up prior to 2015, the period 2013 to 2015. We grew up being told that the loss of gas at Point Lisas was temporary because of maintenance. We discovered, as we suspected when we came into government, that it was not a temporary situation. In fact, it was a dire situation. We were running out of gas. And of course, the shortages at Point Lisas was contributing to our loss of revenue as well. And of course, the nature of the business that we were involved in, over and above the volumes, the nature of the business. Those of you who were present at the Hyatt in a similar gathering which we had called the Spotlight on Energy, we discussed with you how we as a country were positioned in dealing with the oil companies in Trinidad and Tobago, and we had to have new conversations. That was a policy decision which we made publicly. We were scolded by some experts not to say that or do that because we will be driving away foreign exchange, and who are we to talk to BP and Shell about the nature of the business and its contracts, and contracts are sacred. We believe that contracts have to be fair, and we also believe that Trinidad and Tobago was not in its best position in this very important matter of the business of oil and gas, particularly the gas business. And we opened conversations with Shell and BP, and those conversations have been quite far-reaching. And of course, while in some instances there were not legal positions that we could have enforced, there were moral arguments that could have been made, and they were made and made forcefully. And of course, at the end of the day, the Minister of Finance could have reported to you that in the last fiscal year, this fiscal year, in treating with these idiosyncrasies, that the Exchequer has received $2.8 billion US, which was not on the horizon until we took this position. And of course, there are other changes being made, not the least of which are models which would govern how the earnings from LNG going forward would be distributed among the shareholders. And we have deeper discussions taking place about how the shareholding in LNG should be going forward. Because I don't know if you're aware that as we generated the LNG business, we took a 10% in Train 1, whose future is now in jeopardy because of the gas situation. We have no shareholding in Train 2, none in Train 3, and 11% in Train 4. The discussions that we've been having, that we continue to have, and they are at a very sensitive stage, is to try and adjust that. Of course, you know, Trinidad and Tobago, in this business, we sell LNG. But I don't know if you know that we as a country have not been selling LNG. It's been sold for us by others for the first time, arising out of this approach, that we are now handling our own cargo, our shareholding from the LNG business, because we are not afraid to go into the market. And there are benefits to be had there. That is the kind of work that we've had to do. Forced to do that, I would say, by the circumstances which demand that we get up, stand up, and be responsible for the country that we've taken control of at independence and at elections. We have looked around and tried to, at the same time, do some things that would get us diversified. We couldn't flick a switch and diversify the economy. We didn't have the resources to embark upon a major alternative economy. But there were certain things that we thought if we headed in that direction, it would give us some element of diversification that we could build on. So we mentioned tourism, and we set about to try to enter the tourism business by way of bringing Tobago into a destination on the sandals chain. Well, that upset a lot of people. And of course, the reaction was such that the sandals, which is a private family business, the family decided not to waste time in Trinidad and Tobago when they have other business to do elsewhere. And unfortunately, there wasn't much we could do about that. But as you look around the Caribbean, Bahamas, Antigua, many locations in Jamaica, Grenada, you see sandals, and I'm not aware that it is doing anything for them other than diversifying their economy. In some cases, like in the Turks and Caicos, it is the economy. But we passed on from that in Tobago. We successfully have managed to get the Magdalena now targeted for some improved arrangement. That hotel is owned by the state. It's costing us millions of dollars to keep it open and operated. Hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll, like Caribbean Airlines, we could turn that around. And of course, the private sector, through Sunway, is doing some developments in Tobago and have made some proposals to the THA and the central government, which by policy we will act upon to try to welcome their investment in Tobago. And in the not too distant future, we should see some significant improvements and growth in the Tobago economic tourism plant and its economic contribution to Trinidad and Tobago. Agriculture. You hear a lot about agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot about agriculture, but the nice thing about it, except for nutrients, most people who talk about agriculture want nothing to do with it. Not those who are called to the farm to put their hands in the dirt or to eat local produce. Our diet is still largely imported salt, fat, grease, sugar, pretty packets. But the farmers who farm in Trinidad and Tobago will tell you they don't want any lower price. They want a higher price. Those who go to the market to buy will tell you that their biggest issue with the government is the high food prices. So there's a dichotomy there that the farmers want a higher price and those who buy the farm produce want a lower price. And that is balanced by demand and supply. And of course, consumerism is what's going to give the users the best price. We need to become more discerning consumers. If you find the price of lettuce is too high, lettuce, once it's harvested, can't last more than 2 days. As I for $50, I mean, you don't have to buy that. But don't believe that we cannot improve in that area. We can. And by policy, we have decided that some of the resources that are in the public sector, which are grossly underutilized, if we make it available to the private sector the output would contribute to an improvement in our food supply. But with inflation running at 1.2%, where specific food items are part of the basket that you use to measure inflation, the prices that are available for food in Trinidad and Tobago today are not the worst that they could be. And a lot of what is driving food prices in Trinidad and Tobago is import price creep. And consumers are going to be encouraged to be more discerning, because some of the prices that they meet in the marketplace for imported produce are unjustified. And if we want transparency, it is only transparency that will determine what is justified and what is not justified. And I think that is where the government is going to go, to improve consumerism in Trinidad and Tobago, so that we can get the best value for money as we spend on food, because the government tried the experiment before of supplying the food itself, and that was a disaster. Those of you who remember Central Marketing Agency, when the government sold oil and cheese and butter and things like that, well, that is not a solution to the problem of food prices. The solution is produce what we can locally, eat what you produce, be discerning on importation, and of course, be responsible at the personal level. Those things will contribute. And of course, the whole question of what kind of environment we are living in. The budget is impacted upon dealing with the environment, not just the numbers. It's an environment where crime is too high. Violent crime is chronic in our society. A society where our courts are clogged by litigation of all kinds. So we have to take steps to do things that will address those matters. So our legislative program had to be dealt with, and the Attorney General in the weeks and months ahead will be very active in educating the population as to what the legislative effects have been. We have taken steps to complete the Red House, and there are significant knock-ons from that. As we move into the Red House in the next few months, by the end of the year, we pretty much should complete that process. Where the Parliament is located now on the waterfront, government-owned accommodation, we will convert that space into a series of civil courts. So there'll be no civil court business in the Hall of Justice. The Hall of Justice will be entirely for criminal courts, and all the civil court business will be done at where the Parliament now is. So the expenditure on the Parliament will give us that benefit of that movement. And of course, the legislation that the Attorney General has piloted and which is now being put out to work would give us, I think it's removing over 100,000 traffic cases from the court, and the use of digital technology in managing our traffic systems would give us the ability, if you do run the red light, that you get your ticket in the mail. And of course, the management of traffic, a lot of it ends up in the court, tying up space, staff, and judges. We've moved from it being a case to be dealt with in the court to a traffic violation that carries a fine with it, which is dealt with outside of the court system, unless you choose to challenge it. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the kinds of things that the budget has to impact upon and has been impacting upon. And we are now in a position to benefit from that degree of management that we have been carrying on with for the last 48 months. And of course, the Ministry of Finance takes the lead in getting us to be able to do what we set out to do. One, bring our annual expenditure down to a level which can be sustained by the anticipated revenue as we go forward. Two, as you do in the private sector, where you borrow to build a house and pay a mortgage, we are borrowing at the national level, but we have to keep our eyes on our ability to repay. And most importantly, we keep our effort on the infrastructure and the resources that are being directed to the productive side of the country. So these are all the horses attached to the carriage of nation building. And as we have these horses disciplined in front of our national carriage, we expect to move forward. And I simply want today to thank the participants, the panelists who will be here and who will drill down to more granular parts of what I've been touching on here, and thank the staff at the Ministry of Finance for keeping the fuel of the national effort going. I think the Ministry of Finance has done a very significant job, because you got to be comparative. Where we are today can be criticized from all kinds of quarters. But if in September 2015 we were told, well, let's say December 2015, if we were told then that we will be in this position today, we would have taken it. We would have taken it. Because in December 2015, that is when we were in the era of money in the kitty to run the country's business for 3 days. That is when the oil price was heading downwards and had been down as low as $30 a barrel. That is when all the debt that we've paid off in the last 4 years was still there to be paid. And that is when we were facing the prospect, the very real prospect of an IMF program. Because having not gone to the IMF, don't dismiss the fact that had we mishandled this country's business in that situation where we lost so much of our revenue from loss of gas earnings, loss of oil earnings, reduction in volumes on both sides, debt to pay, contracted sums, and so on. Had we mishandled that, we were a prime candidate for the IMF. And of course, the IMF would have been a stranger in Trinidad and Tobago, but a stranger who come to run the place. Because the average person in this country refuses to accept that the Treasury pays the bills of most households. I mentioned fuel subsidy. The subsidy on water is still there. The subsidy on electricity is still there. The subsidy in the school program is still there. The subsidy in the free health system is still there. An IMF program would have dealt with every single one of those. And that is the point I want to make to you. If we were offered today's numbers from the Ministry of Finance, if we were offered that in 2015, we would have grabbed it with both hands. I want to thank the Ministry of Finance and Minister of Finance and his team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We've just heard from the Honourable Prime Minister. At this stage, I'd like to invite the Honourable Sir Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, to come and address us. Having held the reins at the Ministry of Finance for the last just over 48 months, and the one with a bit of prodding from left and right, helped us and stabilized us in getting here. Minister Imbert needs no introduction. He is a former Minister of Health, a former Minister of Works and Transport. He tells us all of the time how many master's degrees he has and in what various aspects. And we remind him he is still not a lawyer. He's holding up his fingers and saying 3. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, without any further ado, I'd like to invite the Honorable Colm Imbert to come and address us as Minister of Finance. Thank you.
Just 1 second, please. Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, other members of the head table, especially the Minister of Planning and Development, who asked me to recognize her. My cabinet colleagues, our Master of Ceremonies, Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of National Security, members of Parliament, members of the business community, especially those members who have very graciously agreed to be part of our panel discussion in a short while, permanent secretaries, mayors and chairmen of regional corporations, senior government officials, permanent secretary, Ministry of Finance. I don't know how he's still standing. We had a grueling couple of weeks. Mr. Dan Paul, chairman of state enterprises, chief executive officers, members of the private sector, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. What I'm going to do today is to put up some charts and graphs to give a pictorial illustration of the situation as very ably introduced by the Honorable Prime Minister. In Parliament, we're not allowed to hold up anything and display it unless we get permission from the Speaker, and you don't always get that permission. Thank you, Corey. So, this graph gives some idea of the stress this country has gone through. The stress this country has gone through in the last couple of years. You will see the oil prices that were enjoyed in the 2011 to 2014 period, averaging from $94, $93, and so on. The average for that period was, in fact, about $90. You will see what happened in the 2014 to 2015 period. There was a precipitous decline from $93 in 2014 to $48 in 2015. And then it averaged at 43. It kept going down. In fact, in February 2016, I always remember this, oil hit $26. It's climbed back up marginally, but we're not out of the woods. And the international oil market now is very unstable. Recently, there were some issues in the Middle East, airstrikes in Saudi Arabia. Oil jumped up to $60 and everybody thought it would keep going up. Well, look at what has happened. That didn't last. Within a week or two, it dropped back down to $50. So that's what we've had to deal with. The lower part of the graph is gas prices. It starts in 2008, but if it went back to 2006, 2007, we were in fact enjoying gas prices as high as $13 per MMBTU. You see what has happened in the last several years? We're barely averaging $3. So to drop from $13 in 2006-07 down to $3, which seems to be the norm now, you can understand what this has done to our economy. That's not all. Look at petrochemical prices. We haven't been enjoying favorable petrochemical prices either. You can see a steady decline in ammonia, urea, and methanol. And all of this impacts us because our major sources of revenue are oil, gas, and petrochemicals. This is the situation with respect to our GDP. The blue line below shows you what happened. We were very flat from 2011 to 2015, and then tremendous decline when oil prices collapsed from $90 to $26. And now we have a steady climb back up. But as I said at the Chamber of Commerce, what is rescuing our economy is not the energy sector really. It is the non-energy sector. And that has been a bulwark of this economy. That growth that you see from 2016 going up to 2019, it's all in the positive direction and upward direction. That is not just energy, because we struggled until about 2 years ago with gas production. We're now getting it back up. It's gone from 3.3 billion standard cubic feet a day up to about 3.7. But it was the non-energy sector that was keeping this country whole, especially financial services and distribution and manufacturing. The green line is inflation, and you'll see it's almost zero. In fact, in the Global Competitive Index, which was issued yesterday or the day before, we are listed in that document as having the lowest inflation in the world, believe it or not. And that is no mean feat. That has managed to keep prices stable and managed to keep the cost of living down in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is a policy decision of this government. One of the reasons why we did not devalue the dollar was we were very conscious of the fact that if we did, we'd go up to the kind of inflation figures. Look at what was happening when the economy was overheating back in the 2007 period. Look at inflation, 15%, 10%. Now we're down to 1%. In fact, in 2018, we hit 0.9. Again, this will give you some idea of revenues. You can see the drastic change between the 2014-2015 period and the 2016 period. And the one I'd like you to look at is the red bar. That's energy sector revenue. You see it was steadily increasing in the period 2011 to 2014 and went way down in 2016, and now it's creeping back up. But what was saving us was the revenue from the non-energy sector. Again, this illustrates what's happening with our economy. We had significant drop in revenue, down to very low levels in the 2016-2017 period. That was the hardest period for this government and for this country, and now it's going back up. This is oil revenue. This is a very good illustration of what has been happening. In 2008, 2009, 2007, look at what oil was contributing to the economy, 45%. Look at what happened in 2017, 1.2%. It's an incredible reduction from 45.1% down to 1.2%. And as you see, because of the very good work done by the empowered team, by the Prime Minister, by Minister Young, by Minister Khan, by NGC and so on, look at what's happening to the contribution of the energy sector to the economy. It's steadily going back up. Again, this is just another illustration of what happened in terms of the period 2016. Now, this is a very interesting slide. The tax amnesty, I was amazed. In 2016, we had a tax amnesty, and we had targeted $500 million. We got $750. So that when we decided to have a tax amnesty this year, as we prepare for the Revenue Authority, I thought maybe we'd get 700, 800 million tops. I was told about the figure about a day before the actual numbers came in. I could not believe it. So I told them double check and triple check. And it was real. The tax amnesty netted 2.38 billion, 2.4 billion. Look at where it came from. The gray line is oil companies. Look at that. $750 million came in taxes just in that 3-month period this year from the oil companies. The light blue to your left, that's corporation tax. Again, companies stepped up, gave us almost 600 million. The dark blue next to the yellow is withholding tax. That's foreign companies. They also stepped up and gave us $431 million. And then individuals, value-added tax, PAYE, these were all much smaller. But the huge contributors, because that's what the Board of Inland Revenue told me. They said the big taxpayers, they targeted them, they spoke to them, and they stepped up. And I want to congratulate the Inland Revenue Division. That's an amazing, amazing performance. They always get a lot of stick from me and others, but they did very, very well this year. Fantastic. That has helped us a lot. Normally we would go into a budget period with the overdraft at about 95%. You heard what the Prime Minister said. It's a feature of Trinidad and Tobago that permanent secretaries wait until July and August. And then they wake up. And then we start to get masses of files coming to the Ministry of Finance because they're all trying to spend what remains in their allocation. So September is always a very, very difficult year because there's all these demands. And checks are written in September that hit you in October and hit you in November. So October and November are the most difficult years for a government. But believe it or not, we went into October with an overdraft of below 90%. And that's all because of the tax amnesty. In fact, it went down to 82% because of the tax amnesty. It's now back up to about 87, 88. But it's really a feeling of relief for us in finance that we don't have to hustle and go and do short-term borrowing and so on to pay our bills in October and November. So that amnesty really helped us out. This is just another illustration to show you what's happening. We went down in 16 and we're coming back up now. Again, this is another illustration. The worst period for this administration was the 16-17 period, and again, our revenue is climbing back up for a number of different reasons. Better collections, reform of the energy sector regime, some additional taxation, and the revenues are now on the way back up. But still, we're not out of the woods yet. And that's why we had to have a deficit budget this year. This slide, if you go right over the extreme right on the top row, we spend almost $10 billion on personnel expenditure in the public sector. And look at where it was in 2008. And in 2008, we had budget surpluses. I remember 2007, the then Minister of Finance telling me the budget surplus for that year was $10 billion. Can you imagine that? A budget surplus? The government had so much money in that period, they couldn't spend it. And it ended up with a surplus of $10 billion. But even then, with those very strong revenues, public sector expenditure on personnel was only $6.9 billion. Now, with our depressed revenues, look where we are, $9.5 billion. That's one of the problems that we have had to grapple with, and it's because of wage increases in the 2011 to 2014 period. That sent everything sky high. And you can see it here. This is a graphical illustration. You see the back pay is kicking in. Prime Minister spoke about that. It's actually $6 billion, Prime Minister, that we had to pay in back pay coming into government with oil price crashing to $26. And that's what we were faced with. But we've managed. We managed to survive. Again, this is just an illustration of how much we spend on salaries, 18% of our total expenditure. This is the fuel subsidy. Look at this. In 2014, this country spent $7 billion subsidizing fuel. That was a period when oil prices were $90, $100. But to spend $7 billion on fuel, it just wasn't sustainable. We just couldn't afford it. And that's why we've reduced the subsidy over time. It has caused an increase in the price of petroleum products, but it was unavoidable. Let's just skip this slide. Now look at this one. This is an interesting slide. The red dots on the top are expenditure. The blue dots just below, revenue. Let's go to 2010. Expenditure was $46 billion. Look at how expenditure grew 46 to 51 to 52 to 57 to 62. Then oil prices collapse. And look at what we have had to do. We've had to drop it from 62 down to 52 to 50 to 48. There was a particular year there in 2017-18 where we just couldn't raise the revenue, and we could only spend $49 billion. Look at the gap between revenue and expenditure, that top line. Even though we dropped it down and we cut 20% out of government expenditure, look at where the revenue was. Revenue was way, way, way down. Look at revenue in the 2008-2009 period. It was almost $54 billion. Look at where it was in the 2017 period, $36 billion. That is what we have had to grapple with as a government. You had a country whose expenditure by the government went from 46 to 62. There wasn't a commensurate increase in revenue. Revenue was always below expenditure. And the country became accustomed to a $62 billion government budget. We just couldn't keep that. We couldn't sustain that. And that is why we set ourselves our target of 50, 51, 52 billion, which we can barely afford, by the way. But everything, it's improving, and that is why we believe our account will come into balance in the next couple of years. This graph I find very interesting. The green line and the yellow line are our balance of payments. Started off pretty good, crashed in 2016 when oil prices dropped to $26. And as you could see, a steady recovery in our current account and our balance of payments, right up into surplus. This valley demonstrates for me what has happened in the economy and what we have done in terms of recovering, stabilizing the economy. Again, there's an interesting slide. In 2015, that's the money that came from the National Gas Corporation. You see $10 billion taken out of state enterprises in 2015 in that election year. After that, the cupboard was bare. In fact, I don't think, Mr. Lokan, did we get anything from you this year? I don't think so. So after the cupboard at NGC was empty, there was nothing left. So that was a huge source of revenue, though, for a previous government. If you look, it went up to 5 billion, went up to 10 billion, so that they were able to rely on reserves that were at the NGC. We have no such flexibility. The Heritage and Stabilization Fund, steady growth. When we came in early, there was a lot of hysteria about the fund. You know, we would crash the fund. When we withdrew money from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund for the first time in the first 2 years, we have withdrawn a total of 637 US million from that fund, but the actual value of the fund has grown by 600 million. So that in September 2015, the value was about 5.6 billion. It's now 6.25. So the managers of that fund have done an excellent job. So even though we took out over 600 million, we've had net growth of 600 million. So that in effect, the fund has earned in excess of $1 billion US over the last 4 years. And the good thing about the Heritage Fund, when you access the fund, it does not increase your public debt. You get US dollars. It has two benefits. You get US dollars that go into your foreign reserves, and you don't increase your public debt when you access the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So it's a very useful tool, very useful fiscal tool. But we've been very careful, and the fund has in fact grown to where it is at 6.25 US billions now. Reserves, the Prime Minister spoke about this. We had a lot of advice from the experts. Devalue the dollar, send it to $10, send it to $12. Well, we've explained that we couldn't do that because it would have had a severe inflationary effect. and there would have been demands for increased wages. It would have wrecked the economy as far as we were concerned. We were told that if we don't devalue the dollar, reserves will evaporate in 6 months. It hasn't. We're still at $7 billion US. We still have 8 months of import cover after 4 years. So that, notwithstanding what we were told, we've managed this very well as well. All right, well, you heard me talk about this in the budget. I'm not sure if I need to go through everything, but I'll just go through some of the areas. We were able to get expenditure down from 62 billion to 50 billion and maintain it at that level. We've dealt with the CL financial matter. We are dealing with pensions in terms of a daily pay. Pension and also indexing for public servants. $5,000 a month were tax-free. We made it $6,000 a month. As for the social safety net, we're going to have a presentation from the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Social Development, so I would leave that there. We also increased, again, seems to have escaped some people, we increased the deduction for tertiary education from $60,000 a year to $72,000. And that's all aimed at helping, especially people in the lower middle and the middle class sector. Because when you're doing a budget, it's very difficult. Mr. Young has made the point. You have so many competing demands. Business wants something, the unions want something, the retail sector, the manufacturing sector, the general workforce, everybody wants something. You have to try and balance. So what we've tried to do over the 4 years is try and assist everybody. People at the lower end, people in the middle, people at the upper end. So the tertiary education expense increase was designed to help people in the middle, as was the change in exemption from stamp duty. We've changed the threshold for stamp duty from $850,000, a property costing $850,000, previously was exempt from stamp duty. We push it up to $1.5 million. Again, this is in an effort to help persons in the middle area. Agriculture sector. We're going to make agriculture a tax-free zone, but only for registered farmers and bona fide farmers. The Ministry of Agriculture will be tasked to make sure that any attempts at fraud are avoided, because there are persons who claim to be farmers and they would buy a car duty-free and it would be a Mercedes-Benz, which could hardly be used on a farm. So that the Ministry of Agriculture will be required to police this. But we thought, what else can we do for agriculture? We've done almost everything, so we've decided to make it completely tax-free. No corporation tax, no VAT, no duty, and hopefully this will now create the environment for persons to get involved in agriculture. In terms of Petrotrin, that story is well known. The Prime Minister referred to it. When we look at the 2018 accounts of Petrotrin, the accumulated losses up to 2018 was $16 billion, with an annual loss of $2 billion. As the Prime Minister pointed out, Heritage Petroleum, which is the exploration and production arm of the old Petrotrin, is now making a profit. In fact, its revenue for its first 9 months was over $3 billion, and its profit was over $500 million. And that's net profit. Imagine going from minus $2 billion to plus $500 million in just 9 months. It's fantastic what was done by the board and management of those companies. I want to congratulate them. They must be congratulated. And what was also done in Petrotrin, seems to have escaped some people, is the refinancing of that bond. They had a bond of $5.5 billion Trinidad dollars maturing in August of 2019. When I went to visit the IMF, World Bank, and the rating agencies, in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and so on. And when they came to visit to do their annual review, on each occasion, 16, 17, 18, and even 19, what all the international agencies told us is that you can't refinance that bond. It's impossible. And the viewpoint of the international arena was that the government would just have to swallow that debt. And it would mean that we would have to increase the public debt immediately by $5.5 billion. That would have destroyed our international credit rating. The fellas went at it, and they managed to refinance the entire $5.5 billion, 850 million US, without a government guarantee. That was also fantastic. The Prime Minister spoke about the Magdalena Grand Beach. We've been in discussions with the Apple Leisure Group now for some months, and we're taking our time. We just want to make sure it's done properly. The Apple Group has shown tremendous interest in the Magdalena Hotel. In fact, the representative who came to meet with us told us that he's tried to get involved in the Magdalena 3 times, and it never worked out. But he's very hopeful that this time it will work out. Now, the Apple Leisure Group is the largest provider of charter air services in the United States. I mean, the largest. It is the largest vertically integrated resort company in the United States. Its subsidiary is called AMR Resorts. It has resorts all over the Caribbean, Central America, North America, South America. And I think, and what's good about them, once we reach agreement with them, they bring airlift. And that is something that Tobago has struggled with. And that was a thing with Sandals. Sandals was also bringing the people. Well, Apple as well, in fact, had a little joke with the guy. I said, I didn't know anything about Apple Leisure Group. I said, how do you compare with Sandals? He said, we're bigger than them. So it was quite an interesting conversation. But they are a huge operator, and they are expanding in the Caribbean. And if we can reach agreement with them, it will be a tremendous fillip for Tobago, because they'll brand the hotel as one of their hotels, and they will provide the necessary airlift and the necessary visitors for the hotel, which is what any serious resort needs. Seabridge, the Jean de Valette has come. When I saw photos of it before it came, I couldn't believe it looked like a luxury hotel to me. I haven't traveled on it yet. I intend to do so in a week or so. But I understand it's making the trip in 2.5 hours. It's a very luxurious, a very comfortable boat. And it gives some inkling as to what Tobago will get in about a year or so, when the 2 new fast ferries that are under construction in Australia, there's one being built by Austal and one being built by Incat. And what the negotiating team decided to do is not put all our eggs in one basket. There are 2 world-class fast ferry manufacturers in Australia, Austal and Incat, and the viewers, let's get one of each. And those boats will be at the level of the Jean de Valette and better, because they are state-of-the-art modern craft. So that when those 2 boats come in, the Seabridge will be in a great place for many, many years to come. Hospitals. We have a lot of hospital construction taking place. Arima, well underway, almost finished. Point Fortin, well underway, almost finished. Sang de Grande, the sod was turned just a couple of days ago. Diego Martin Health Center, due for completion. Couva Hospital has begun to provide particular services, diagnostic imaging, pharmacy services, and so on, and will soon be part of an proposed offshore medical program together with the University of the West Indies. So there's a lot going on in terms of the health sector. The San Fernando to Point Fortin Highway, I must give credit to the Minister of National Security, Minister of Works. That project was rescued. We were able to recover as a government $1 billion in performance bonds and advance payments bonds that the contractor who had gone bankrupt had posted with international banks, And that $1 billion was very, very helpful in the early days when we were able to get moving and award contracts to local contractors. Everything on the San Fernando to Point Fortin Highway now is totally local Trinidad and Tobago contractors. And in fact, I was quarreling with my colleague, Mr. Sinanan, the other day. I had driven down to Point Fortin. I went all the way to Cedros, actually. And I saw all the work taking place, and I said, Rohan, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be promoting this. I mean, for those of you who go down to the Southland, the highway construction work taking place between Gulf City and Paria Suites and Mosquito Creek and in the Otahiti area, the Ruzelac area, fantastic. So that we are very assured that by the end of next year and into January of 2021, we'll have a first-class highway fully completed by this government all the way to Point Fortin. And the area that is of most interest to me is the Mosquito Creek area. Everybody who travels in that area will know when you have a high spring tide and a strong wind, you're going to get salt water coming into the Mosquito Creek. Well, that will be a thing of the past within the next year or so. The Valencia-Toco Highway, the Churchill Roosevelt extension of Manzanilla. Some people are asking, what are we doing? And at the same time complaining that we're not doing anything, we have no plan to diversify the economy. We have decided that the northeast quadrant of Trinidad should be a growth pole. It's an underserved, underdeveloped area. The only way you can develop an area is if you put in infrastructure, so that all of these roadworks and the Toco Port are designed to create a hub of economic activity in the northeast part of Trinidad and Tobago, which has been neglected for so long. Look at what's happening in the south in terms of all of the work that has been done there, the industrial development. That's what we want to see replicated in the northeast area, but in a different way, of course, more focused on ecotourism and things like that. But certainly, the only way you can develop the country is to put in infrastructure. Look at the United States. Look at the network of highways they put in. The United States could never have developed from the depression of the 1920s to where they are now if they had not built a huge network of highways and infrastructure. So this is what we are doing in order to grow that part of the country. The Curup interchange, as the Prime Minister mentioned, it's now being built at less than half the price of what was going to cost under the previous administration. And it will be commissioned in the first quarter of 2020. And for those of you who drive up that way, it's been done quietly, peacefully, without creating too much congestion. I want to congratulate the Ministry of Works. They're doing very well on that project. I want to congratulate them. The heritage buildings. You know, for so many years, I've been in public life now for 28 years. And I remember one of my first assignments was to try and sort out these heritage buildings. But for one reason or another, we couldn't get it going. Another government came in, they couldn't do it. Another government came in, they couldn't do it. The last government came in, they couldn't do it. And now this government has already rehabilitated Solmeyer's Castle, put it to use, renovated Whitehall, which is now the seat of the Honorable Prime Minister. The Red House, for those of you who drive up Abercrombie Street, you will see it's almost close to completion. President's House will soon be completed. Millefleur under renovation. Within the next 6 to 9 months, all of these historic buildings will be completely renovated and rehabilitated. As I said, I've been in public life for 28 years. And for 28 years, successive governments couldn't do it. This government has done it. I'm very proud of that. And I tell the Prime Minister about it. He doesn't always want to hear. But he is one of the main drivers. He is one of the main drivers. That is one of his legacies, the restoration of these historic buildings. The Prime Minister is the main driver of those things. We also have a new industrial park coming in Couva. The negotiations are completed. Contractual arrangements are completed. Funding is almost available. Within the next month or so, construction will begin, and that project is due for completion towards the end of next year. We also have an agro-processing facility down in Moruga, and the airport in Tobago. I saw a commentator from Tobago complaining that we had only allocated 200 million for capital development in Tobago. And I thought to myself, the cost of the new airport terminal in Tobago is $870 million. That alone is almost 5 times the development program allocation for Tobago. And it tells you that when people want to make a criticism, they don't deal with reality. Because if you went to the document, you would see that other state agencies, WASA, etc., will be spending almost $1 billion in capital expenditure in Tobago in this fiscal year 2020. The House of Assembly itself has been granted 230 million. And for the first time ever in history of Trinidad and Tobago, we've given the Assembly the capacity to borrow $300 million for capital development projects. So when you add that up, $1 billion from other agencies, 200 million to the House of Assembly directly, 300 million loan approval, that's $1.5 billion, and then add in the airport, you cross $2 billion. So that the capital injection in terms of physical development in Tobago for the coming year will be $2 billion, 10 times the numbers that I'm hearing from some of the critics. And that new airport will be modern. It will have loading bridges. It will bring Tobago into the modern era in terms of air transport. And that's not all. While that project is underway, we expect construction to begin around March of next year because it's a design build. So we expect them to start designs within the next month or two and construction in March. We're not leaving the existing terminal alone. The existing terminal was good when it was built, but it was built so many years ago. We are now going to upgrade the existing terminal building in Tobago immediately within the next 6 months. Construction should start within the next month or so and see what we can do to improve the passenger facilities in the existing terminal while the new terminal is under construction. I saw the procurement regulator outside. He told me I treated him well. I think he was talking about his budgetary allocation because we intend to work very closely with them to get this procurement arrangement going. In terms of border security, we have 2 modern Cape-class patrol vessels coming in 2020, and that is going to significantly strengthen our capability to protect our borders. Diego Martin Sporting Complex, a world-class facility, was opened this year. Carnage Fishing Facility in 2018, another world-class facility. The waterfront in San Fernando, I see the member for San Fernando West is saying thank you, finally is going. And we have a lot of other projects underway. It's impossible to list all of them. And these are some of the budget measures I just thought I would highlight. We are removing this burden for pensioners to prove that they are alive. And it can be done by just matching the PIN number on the birth certificate with the records at the registry, because deaths and births are now integrated, are now digitized and integrated. I made the point at a chamber forum that in the 1990s, when another government was in power, I asked the then Minister of Transport, I think it was around 1999, could you please get rid of these ridiculous forms that we have to fill out when we come in? And he said, yes, never happened. So that it's going to happen in 2020. If you had been traveling to the United States in the last couple of years, you'd see how the states went. First, they took away the immigration form. Now, customs. If you go to Europe, no forms at all. You just walk in. They use machine-readable passports and electronic databases to deal with matching and recording where people are and where they're going. And this will ease up arrivals and business generally at our airport. Switch to LED bulbs. I heard some criticism of this. not very good criticism. But I want to congratulate Guardian Media. I guess Guardian Media will be surprised to hear me say that. I saw a calculation done by Guardian Media on the television maybe a night or two ago. And it demonstrated the difference between an incandescent bulb, a fluorescent bulb, and an LED bulb. And whoever did that went on to work out the power requirements of each type of bulb, the life of each type of bulb, and then worked out the savings of changing out incandescent bulbs to LED bulbs, and came up with a figure of $280 million in savings. And I'm sure it's close to that. The power usage of LED bulbs and the lifespan of LED bulbs, there's no comparison between that and incandescent bulbs. We also want to try and encourage people to go to solar. We're putting in 100% tax credit for solar water heaters now, up to a maximum of 10,000. And next year we'll be looking at solar panels for other purposes, for lighting and electricity and so on, to see what we can do there to encourage the use of solar panels. We've made some changes in the oil and gas taxation reform to reduce the amount of losses that oil companies can carry forward, and also to give them greater tax credits for exploration. We thought we should increase OJT stipends. We thought it's about time. And we also are increasing the intake to 8,000 trainees per year. The minimum wage, I don't think there are many people that are in disagreement with this. We've increased the minimum wage to $17.50 because we think that's a decent wage, at least at the bare minimum. And we're also increasing wages for people at the lowest end of the spectrum in CPEP and URP. The personal allowance at the airport, that hasn't been changed since 2005, so we thought it was unrealistic. We're increasing that to $5,000. We want to get people involved in sponsoring fashion, video, sport, art, so we've increased the tax allowance there from 3 million to 6 million. The index linking of public service pensions, that almost happened in 2009. There was a crash again in those days in the oil prices, so that the government of the day, I was a part of it, shied away from it. But I think it's only fair that public service pensions should be index linked. So we'll spend this year working out the formula as to how we can do that. Daily paid workers. I was a minister of local government, believe it or not, in the 1993 to 1995 period. And I remember the then NUGFW president, I think it was Selwyn John, asking for a pension for daily paid workers. Now here we are, 25 years later, and this government is going to finally give daily paid workers a pension. Now let me explain why. Some people say, well, that's no big thing, because when they get to 65, they'll get old age pension. Again, those criticisms are not based on facts. One of the hardships that daily paid workers endure, because they don't have a pension plan, when they get to age 60, they don't qualify for the senior citizen's pension, because senior citizen pension is eligible at age 65. So there's a go-over period there between age 60 and age 65. All they get is a small lump sum which is expended very quickly, and then they suffer pain between age 60 and age 65, at which time, if they're eligible, they can get the senior citizen's pension. So this bridges the gap for all of those daily paid workers from 60 to 65. It's something they've asked for a very, very long time. In terms of credit unions, there was a team comprised of Ministers Lee Hunt, Minister West, and others. The Minister of Labour was involved, who had wide-ranging discussions with the credit union movement to see what can be done to facilitate their requests, because they asked us to allow them to provide banking services, but they're not regulated, and that is the problem. And we don't want another Hindu credit union situation again. So that after a lot of discussion, we were advised that they had agreed that those credit unions who want to offer banking services would come under the supervision of a new entity which would be reporting to the Ministry of Finance. and the Deposit Insurance Corporation will also get involved to guarantee deposits in credit unions. With respect to, and there are many other things we're going to do for the credit union movement as we roll that out over this year. Then, finally, we're going to ban styrofoam for food containers and single-use plastics like water bottles. And we are going to do it. We will be bringing legislation to the Parliament within the next 2 to 3 months to deal with that. I spoke already about agriculture, and then the final thing is our bond issue for VAT refunds. And I know how terrible the situation is with VAT refunds, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. I know that many of these small businesses are struggling with cash flow because they just can't get their VAT refunds. But we can't give it to them, at least not easily, because every dollar in a VAT refund is a dollar that the country loses in revenue. And as I said at the chamber meeting, if I wiped out all the VAT refunds, then the VAT collections for this year, the net collection, would be zero. So that would take a huge bite out of our revenue for running the country. So we've come up with this bond solution, and I think it will go a long way to assisting. And as I pointed out, it's in the first instance, and we'll see how it goes. We're not going to discriminate. Everybody, every business that is owed a VAT refund will be able to participate. It is going to increase the public debt by $3 billion and more if we go with another bond issue, but we decided to do it. It's a problem that we inherited. We inherited $4.5 billion in VAT arrears when we came in, and we've been carrying that load ever since, trying to pay it off, but we can't. So that we decided to go this way, issue the bonds, which would be fully tradable, fully transferable, bear a small interest. You know, we were thinking about what we could afford, and we settled on a 1.5% interest. And those who need cash right away would be able to sell these bonds to financial institutions and so on. So we think that it is a good, innovative solution to a huge problem that businesses had. And we will solve this problem, and then we will seek to have VAT refunds current going forward. So these are just some few illustrations of what we have done with this budget. This budget is a continuation of our last 4 budgets, where we tried to help everyone, we tried to assist everyone, and we tried to share the burden of sacrifice equitably across everyone. The economy has been stabilized. I'm confident of it. You saw from the charts, it's growing. So that we feel that there's a lot of good things in store for this country as we go forward. And I thank you for the confidence in this government and myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Imbert. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, you have heard from the 2 main stakeholders in the government with respect to the budget and what has been done, the Honourable Prime Minister and, of course, the Minister of Finance. It's an appropriate point for just a couple minutes as we bring the next session into play, which is going to be our panel discussion. We're going to have moderating our panel discussion, quite appropriately, the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Vishnu Danpal. He's going to be joined by Ms. Franca Costello, the President of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, who I see is not at her seat, Mr. Riaz Ahmad, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Mark Lokwan, the President of the National Gas Company, Ms. Jacinta Bailey-Sobers, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and Ms. Sonia Francis Yearwood, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Works and Transport. Ladies and gentlemen, this panel was a very carefully chosen panel, and as you can immediately see, we've asked for the private sector contribution through the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. as well as the Manufacturers Association, to come and share their perspectives. Every panelist would be allowed a period of time between 10 to 15 minutes to give their perspective to us, the audience. And then Mr. Mark Loquan, as the President of National Gas Company, who I've been working with over the past couple of years as we try to reset the clock on gas issues affecting Trinidad and Tobago. People often forget that in the last decade we've really moved from petroleum and the traditional oil more to the gas sector, and it's when we travel internationally, as has become one of the facets of our local society. Internationally, and I was speaking to Minister Khan, who recently returned from an international gas conference, internationally Trinidad and Tobago is lauded and recognized as one of the pioneers in the gas industry. And this is something that we should feel particularly proud about. But we have been negotiating very hard, as the Prime Minister referred to, over the last 4 years, both from a production point of view, but also a cost of gas and sale of gas perspective. So Mr. Loquan, who's been integral in that at the National Gas Company, will give his perspective. Another very important point, and why we chose the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, that is often lost and not appreciated by us here in Trinidad and Tobago, is that over the last four years, as you've heard the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister tell us, even in difficult economic circumstances, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has not faltered in continuing to maintain the comfort and the safety net at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. So the Permanent Secretary will tell us the quite startling figures, because they are very startling when they were provided to us at the cabinet level, of how we've managed to maintain the billions of dollars given to the less fortunate in society, whether it be via disabilities and other types of grants, but also importantly, you've heard a lot of talk this morning about pensions and government pensions and what those payments mean to those sectors of our society. And then, of course, a country is built infrastructurally. And every time you travel outside of Trinidad and Tobago, whether it be to one of the first world developed countries, travels to China recently and going across a massive highway of 34 kilometers built over the water, each side of the highway having 3 lanes going and coming on what is effectively a bridge over the sea, and you see that type of infrastructure. I can tell you as an individual, just driving to Maracas and driving to some of the rural areas of Trinidad, for example, to Moruga the other day, to Cedras, I always wonder how the decisions were taken to build the roads and to see the type of infrastructure that we Trinidadians, I'm sure, and in Tobago, very often take for granted. Doing a recent flyover to Tobago after the floods and seeing the roads from the lower side of Tobago up to the northern side of Tobago on both sides of the island, very often we don't appreciate that type of infrastructural work. You've heard the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance tell us a little bit about the type of infrastructural works we've been doing from 2015 come forward. So we'll have the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Works and Transportation provide us with those statistics and the necessary information. So at this stage, I see our panelists have returned, save for Mr. Hamad. Okay, I'd like to invite you all up onto stage and we'll welcome our panelists as they settle in. Ms. Costello, Mr. Riaz Ahmad, Mr. Loquan, Ms. Jacinta Bailey-Sobers, and Ms. Sonia Francis Yearwood. Please join us up on stage. Vishnu as well. Yes, Dan Paul. As they're being mic'd. At the end of the panel discussion, when people have provided their presentations, what we will do is we will invite the members of the audience for a question and answer session where you can ask the panelists questions. We'd ask that the questions, of course, be related to their presentations and the whole budget scheme. And after that, I'd be inviting the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Minister of Finance to then join the panelists on stage. And we will take some questions from the media. Okay, I've just been informed we have a bit of a change in the composition of the panel. Mr. Ahmad had to leave. He's not feeling too well. I was going to call. So we're going to be joined by the CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Gabriel Faria, at the panel instead. And at this stage, it's good to see somebody else put in a hot seat at a short notice. At this stage, I'll hand over to the moderator of this section of today's proceedings, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Vishnu Danpal.
Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, Minister Colm Imbert, my boss, he didn't tell me to say that. Minister Camille Robinson Regis, she didn't tell me to say that. Members of the Cabinet, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'd like to start by just saying that it is very difficult, almost impossible, to prepare the perfect budget. At some time, somehow, somewhere, someone is going to be upset about something. The perfect budget is very, very difficult to prepare. And it is against that background, I'd like to go straight into our first panelist, and that will be Mr. Mark Loquan from NGC. Mr. Loquan is a chemical engineer by profession, with over 30 years experience in the petrochemical industry. He was appointed president of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in September 2016 and was appointed director of the board of NGC in July 2019. Mr. Loquan acquired an MBA in 1990 from the Business School of Duke University and received training in executive leadership and management from Cornell. Mr. Loquan serves on the boards of Atlantic LNG, Phoenix Park Gas Processors Limited, the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago. He's also a member of the government's Standing Committee on Energy and a member of the government's Empowered Negotiation Team. And he likes to say, in his capacity as a private citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mark Loquan.
Morning. Thank you, Vishnu. All protocols observed. I know I was challenged by Minister Imbert to finish on time, so I'll try to. The world of energy. How do you position a country that is so dependent on energy for the future, where there's a lot of change going on globally and fast, and at the same time we're meeting deadlines and contracts expiring like an alligator's biting your feet at the same time? And that's the challenge that we have had. This isn't counted in the time. Right? To change. Can you get it? While that is going on, I'll continue talking. Because when we talk energy, it's about looking at where the world is going in a long way. And when you look at the BP outlooks on energy, it goes up to 2040. And what you see is that the global energy demand is growing at 1.2% a year. But within that growth, you're seeing coal declining. Okay. You're seeing coal declining. You're seeing oil at about 0.3% growth rate. You're seeing gas at 1.7%, and you're seeing renewables at 7%. However, when you look at the mix going forward, don't hold anything against me. Basically, you see the renewables are rising rapidly. But in the broad scheme of things, it's not changing the whole equation of energy. It's not making everything disappear. We even talk about oil peaking at 2035, you know, in these kinds of outlooks. A lot of trends happening. With the population growing at another 1.7 billion by 2040, what you see happening is there's changes in the middle class. You start to see China and India demanding more energy as a middle class. You start to see environmental issues causing big changes. So what you start to see, like in China, you're starting to see a lot of LNG demand as a result of the blue sky policies and moving away from pollution. What that does is you see China taking almost half the global LNG trade in 2018. I'm going to skim through these slides. It's no coincidence that Australia built enough LNG plants that went from 24 million tons a year about 4 years ago. And they're close to 80 million tons and surpassing Qatar. So you don't see them as a big growth rate going forward, but you do see the US and you do see Qatar dominating growth rate in many new LNG projects being planned. How that affects us in Trinidad is that you see the shale gas phenomena in the US has definitely brought about a big disconnect between the oil prices and gas prices. You start to see lower gas prices in the US. You start to see new ammonia plants and methanol plants being built in the US. What that does, it puts ammonia and methanol in this region in a surplus and keeps prices down, right? Regionally, we note the climate change issue. Regionally, we see that the Caribbean is a big consumer of petroleum products while they grapple with climate change issues. And globally, the carbon emissions worldwide is still increasing. And a big part of that is the coal issue, as you know. That means Trinidad has a role to play in the region with LNG as clean fuel, sitting right here in this strategic location. The Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, and the Minister of Finance talked about gas supply. Well, we can see what was presented in January 2017 at the Energy Conference was the graph on the left. It was called Mount Trinidad, with all the declines in reservoirs, with all the lack of investment in upstream, with starfish not successful. That is what was being predicted. What happened was actually the right-hand side. And the right-hand side went from 3.1 to between 3.6 and 3.7 billion standard cubic feet per day, as we were told. That did not happen by chance, actually, and it was a result of a lot of discussions with government, NGC, and all the players in the chain. But you can see a lot of upstream development has happened since Stroke and Juniper and Sercan, Angeline earlier this year. So even De Novo, as a smaller player coming in end of last year, BHP debottlenecking. So there has been a lot of seismic analysis being done with digital technology, and there's been a lot of development in the upstream. And if we look forward, you see a lot of announcements being made, right? You see Ruby and SIP and Matapal, or formerly Savannah and Macadamia and so on, Cassia compression. Some of these projects are like 2021, 2022 periods, and some are more medium term, right, as we know. Dragon was one of those. So what this did is increase production capacity and supply in Trinidad. But for the downstream plants, it also increased stability. And all the cycles that used to happen for many years and deep curtailments that used to happen suddenly weren't the issue anymore. Big outages on the upstream do not result in plant shutdowns anymore or big cycles. In fact, plants stay online. That was unheard of, you know, a few years ago. In the meantime, there has had to be a number of contracts put in place. This is the alligators biting at the feet, right? So we really had to put the contracts with the upstream first, the BP, the EOG, BHP, De Novo, and Shell some months ago, just to try to get all the downstream contracts in play. Some were signed last year, and some are very well live right now and continuing, while at the same time, the Atlantic LNG Train 1 was expiring in September last year and needed to be restructured in more transparent pricing, not only using Henry Hub anymore, but across a basket of prices, Europe, Asia, and Brent crude, and so on. So there's a lot of waiting on the pricing now in LNG towards Asia. And I showed you why that had to be so. At the same time, there is a focus now on Train 1, where we know there has been some uncertainty on gas supply, and there's uncertainty on how much to invest to take the train forward. Those discussions are live daily, so I won't comment more on those kinds of issues, but it is a big consideration. And the other issue is the Atlantic restructuring, which is bigger than a Train 1 issue. It is really how the government now capitalizes on its capability to market and trade and build that capacity for the future. And as we saw, this is not a gas master plan about 4 years ago that stated that the petchem was where all the margins and value was achieved. It's not happening that way anymore. It's actually the LNG. The contribution by NGC has fallen considerably since 2013 and is now around 5%. A lot of that also is linked to the petrochemical prices. So we are in the perfect storm of lack of molecules, lower petchem prices, shorter contracts, shale gas evolution exploding in the States, and many ammonia plants coming on, and that's the storm we're in, while you face for the future. As the Minister of Finance would show, the percentage of the energy income is about 37%, it's just under 40%, while the non-energy is about 60%. In terms of looking forward, because I just said the petchem prices is a big part of how you would earn your money, but you can look forward and see, well, that isn't going to go back to the 2013 period. In fact, it's just rising slightly. And within that rise is also cycles of ups and downs. So the petchem plants are challenged. The sustainability of the petchem sector is, of course, a concern once we get past these contracts that we're trying to negotiate, because this is where we've taken decades to build up value. But the plants are challenged with higher freight rates. They no longer can send their ammonia to the US. They have to go further away, etc., etc. In the meantime, bringing it back home to NGC, clearly we have some challenges. Clearly we have margins that are no longer the same as years ago. We have to diversify and grow. LNG is one of those areas. The downstream negotiations are very active, and the sustainability beyond the existing contracts are very important, how we tweak the chain going forward. In the meantime, we talk a lot better between upstream and downstream to collaborate when plants are going down to the molecule. And we also are ensuring that we get the best value where we can. Claims, there's no secret that we were faced with $5 billion in claims, which of course was a significant threat. That has been significantly reduced by commercial resolution. And it's still going on. We're not out of the woods. And of course, we have been trying to face the issues of liquidity, particularly as one of the biggest paying customers in an environment of high price gas, starting from January 2019, is not paying. So that is an issue that is of course a concern how you solve that. We haven't sat back. We've introduced power tranches that shifts the burden from NGC and the people of Trinidad and Tobago to some of the upstream suppliers across the board, as well as managing cash flow in a much more sensitive manner, and energy efficiency, which has of course been very much on the agenda. So looking forward, I would say that if we have to position this company and the country for the future, you have to ask the question, how do we get value across the entire chain? And it's not about pockets anymore. And the companies that we deal with are integrated. So it's how do we get the best value in our upstream? How do we boost supply? How do we get skills deepened like geology and so on? And on the other side, you see skills being built in marketing and trading, relationships with China being worked out, and a focus, of course, as I said, was the Train 1 life extension and Atlantic restructuring conversations. In the meantime, the value is bigger than NGC. As a group, you see Guyana developing, of course, going to produce 120,000 barrels of oil a day next year, and up to 750 by 2025. In the meantime, National Energy is positioning itself with an office by the last quarter of this year. TT Engage is already a one-stop shop for everyone. And of course, NE is looking very much at energy efficiency and ESCOs. With PGPL, by having a technical services agreement, and in fact, we are due to start training 24 operators over the next year in 6-week cycles. That's a relationship that is developing with the gas processing entity in Ghana and our gas processing entity in Trinidad, as well as options for inorganic growth. And it wasn't too long ago, speaking more about the climate issue, that we had only 6 CNG stations, and it's going up to about 20 by the end of the year, I'm told. And then it wasn't too long ago, a few years ago, that the conversions to CNG was like in the order of 30 a year, and now it's in the order of 50 a week. So congrats to Curtis and the team. So just to summarize, I would say sustainability of the petchem sector is very much a focus area after we solve the gas contract issues. That is very much in mind. The value creation across the gas chain and optimization of our upstream is important, group synergies. I'll jump to the last one, which is technology. And I would say we just finished 5 e-auctions at NGC. Tender processes for items, I'm talking materials and services that can be specified. We have just done 5. And in the order of months that it takes to go through these mechanisms, it takes 1 hour. In a very transparent manner, right? We now have Atlantic, we have other agencies coming to NGC saying, well, how are you doing that? And that's happening right here in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the strategic partnerships we're working on. LNG is a key area for the future. And as we build this company, we are looking at national contribution through a different lens, and that is through sustainable development. It's not just sponsoring X and Y, it's about what's happening in 3 years' time and how we build the communities. So I would end there and just basically say that to achieve this issue, we do need to remain focused on the long term. We do need to solve the issues, of course, before us. And while we do it, we do need to make sure that at the end of this process, there are people left in place that can have the competence to do the job for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that comprehensive overview of the global energy market as well as the domestic energy market. I remember hearing 15 years ago that we only had oil and gas for 15 years. So that's just a nice breakdown there. We'll go straight into our next panelist. And Gabriel Faria has over 40 years leadership experience in various companies and industries, both locally, regionally, in North America, Europe, and the Far East. He has come up through the ranks and has held senior executive role at Caribbean, Guardian Media, Angostura, SM Jalil, Marcy Group, Geddes Grant, in addition to serving on numerous boards. He's currently the CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and he holds a master's in business administration in international business. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Gabriel Faria.
Good morning, all protocols observed. It's a privilege to be able to address this august group, and I was very happy to hear the Minister of National Security said that they want to get feedback from the various groups and open the questions. First of all, I want to clarify, we recognize that we are in a disruptive environment. We recognize it's a new normal. What normally happens in the private sector when something like this happens is we pull together the troops, we pull together our stakeholders. In this case, it's labor, business, civil society, and we get buy-in to a vision, a future, and we chart a path with them. If I were going to challenge the government's trying to do it on its own to a certain extent. And I'm asking the government to take a collaborative approach to us charting a future together. This way, one thing we learn in management is if it's your idea, I'm not sure it's going to work. If it's our idea, it has a hell of a lot better chance of succeeding. Interestingly, my opening slide speaks a little bit about what the Minister of National Security says. Chamber started in 1599. The world's changed. In those days, what used to be the chamber here was interested in cocoa and coffee. But we recognize, the business community recognizes, that it cannot succeed unless we get buy-in from the other stakeholders. We recognize the role of government, labor, and most importantly, the consumer in our ecosystem. Our primary interest is not on a select few. Our primary interest is on helping to grow capacity. The first thing I put in there, because I want the Minister of Finance to know I'm on his side, both ministers, is we want people to pay their taxes. And the reason we want people to pay their taxes is because we pay our taxes. And because you're not collecting enough taxes from the other people, you look to us to make up for that shortfall. We want employees to be fairly treated, but we want productive employees. We recognize, especially on this rock we live on, or these rocks we live on, we recognize the environment is part of our ecosystem and we have to protect it. We've been spending a lot of time focusing on the next generation of businesses, and that's what we're focused on. We believe, and I was happy to hear the Minister of Finance say this today, sometimes he might say it differently, all businesses contribute, be they manufacturing, services, distributing. These are some of the things we are going to talk about. The Minister knows I'm going to talk about one thing with a little more passion, and there's going to be VAT refunds. Let me go straight to it. I would like to thank the government for looking at agriculture. We recognize the importance and we support the initiatives. I'd like to thank the government for making the decision on e-tech and the industrial parks. I think it's time we looked collaboratively, as we said, as to how private sector could participate. The housing project, again, driving employment, building small businesses, even addressing crime. Because if we get small businesses to hire people, it's going to make a difference. I'm concerned about Tobago because I think our action is reactive. I don't think we have a strategic plan for Tobago. We've talked, and the Minister of Finance told me on Tuesday that that the land license order is not part of the budget. But it is. It is because it's something that costs you nothing. It's something that costs you nothing that can have a significant impact. Today, Tobago, if you talk to some people, will tell you how difficult it is for them. They have the land license act, it hasn't helped. Land license order, sorry. So let's look at it, let's change it. Foreigners accounted for 2% of the transactions when they were buying property, 2%. So what is that 2% going to do? It's going to drive construction, it's going to drive foreign exchange, it's going to drive employment, it's going to drive tourism. It's past its prime. The Prime Minister was in Tobago probably a year ago. We talked about it. Nothing's happened. We are masking the problem. The THA is masking the problem. I listen to the Prime Minister whenever I have the opportunity to hear him speak. We were sitting in an NTAC meeting and he talked about the challenges he has finding labor in Tobago. I don't know if you remember that. And for your farm. And the people you employ. So the THA is trying to solve the problem by employing more people than they should, by building more office space. I wonder if there's any government in the world that has more office space per person than the THA has in Tobago. Whenever I drive to Tobago, it amazes me. Incentivizing exports. Expansion of the tax credit. Again, we'd like to compliment the Minister of Finance on that. Mixed feelings on the increase on minimum wage. Why? The government gives it, the private sector pays it. Right? So I'm happy you gave it, and the reality is that most large businesses pay more than minimum wage. Who's going to get hurt? Some of the smaller businesses, some of the small entrepreneurs. They're the ones that's going to have the pressure. That's going to have an impact on cost. It's interesting, I use mixed messages. Somebody told me my interpretation might be wrong. I think it was the last election, or the last budget, the minister said he was cutting the allocation to CPEP and URP. The one we're increasing wages. Somebody told me you might actually still be cutting the number of people, but I don't know. But again, it's mixed messages. The big one, VAT refunds. I refer to Section 54 and Section 35, and I know I have two ministers who can tell me if I'm saying something wrong, so please tell me. If a business does not honor its legal obligations, it pays an 8% penalty and 2% interest per month. If I'm wrong, not that way. If the government does not pay its refund in 6 months, its obligation is 1% per month. That is the law that the government has set up. I wanted to quote the minister because I want to make sure I got it right. So I've quoted him there. I got calls, because I made a comment, I complimented the minister on doing something, however small it was. And people started calling me and saying, you know, how can you say this? The government has been holding my money for 2 years. I haven't gotten a cent. And now they want to give me 1.5% per year instead of 1% per month for 5 years. I'm going to get 80 cents on the dollar. When I take that bond, I'm going to get 80 cents on the dollar. But the government is going to take money for NIF, for foreign bond, and give 4% or 4.5%. Why are they treating us who have been compliant, who have paid their taxes, who have done the right thing? Why are they going to penalize us by offering us 1.5% per year? That's a major challenge. And this is not big business. Because I've been so vocal on this, wherever I go, a printer in Chaguanas, 1.4 million. A software developer in Aruca, 211,000. A seafood producer in Couva, 800,000. A paper manufacturer in East, 30 million. I know we all know that one. But there's so many companies that are hurting. People are telling me, I'm not hiring. I've stopped exporting. I'm not making capital investments. How do I deal with my capital investments because I can't get my refund? The important word I saw there, refund's going to be put on a current basis. We need more clarity around this. Hold on, let me go back. Right. The reality is when we look at VAT, and I really want to spend a little more time on it, that 1.5% means people are taking a haircut of 20%. I'm going to plead with the government to relook at that. Don't treat your compliant taxpayers worse than you treat your foreign investors. You gave them 3.5% or 4.5%. Why treat your compliant taxpayers worse than them? Why incentivize those who don't pay tax and let them laugh at those who do? At least issue a bond at a rate that leaves the taxpayer whole on its principal. At least issue a bond that can be discounted that leaves the compliant taxpayer whole on the principal. At least. The private sector is willing to offer the government a tax amnesty on VAT. Modernization of the revenue authority of the public sector. You know, I told the minister the other day, we hear things come into the budget every year. And the reality is, the revenue authority is one of them. In the private sector, there's a saying, there's a predictable outcome. The predictable outcome is the opposition will not support. And if the opposition doesn't support, we don't have a revenue authority. We have to collect those taxes. Let's get, I'm hoping the opposition will support this, but there's a predictable outcome, and they will not. Or if they do, it'll take forever. We can't waste another year. So I'm challenging the other Minister of Finance to look at what we can do to fix what we have, to at least start collecting some of that money. Everyone should pay taxes. Every business, every employee, every doctor, every lawyer, every engineer, every politician. Right. So we have the power to change the predictable outcome. Do it. Digitization. We are inefficient. Business is inefficient. People come to me, I have to go and get a check certified to pay this. I have to go and get a check to do this. I was fortunate. The first thing the Minister West said is, I am going to work on e-payments. You have our support. Let's get this thing done. We are wasting focus and effort doing things that are not adding value. Too many things come up in budget. Let's deal with them. You have our support. The private sector is not interested. We cannot be successful if this country fails. The private sector cannot succeed if the country fails. So don't think the private sector is going to succeed, because we know if the country fails, we fail. I'm sorry I didn't see something on entrepreneurship. The finance minister doesn't like to hear me talk about Jamaica or anyone. Right? However, Jamaica set a model, 45 companies on the Junior Stock Exchange, a vibrant angel investor and entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have tried. I know the Ministry of Labour has a small business department, but we need to do more, and we need the government to recognize there's so much capital sitting in the banking system that can cost the government nothing. Cost the government nothing. If we can mobilize that and create incentives for those people holding capital to invest in small businesses. I read in the competitiveness report that most countries are not going to meet the SDGs. But we are committed to supporting the government on this. Again, it's collaboration. Don't force it down the throat. Let's work together to make it happen. NCDs, I notice the Minister of Health has left. A big issue in the region. Again, NCDs, non-communicable diseases. Let's work together. There's talk about a label which is obscene. I want to use the word obscene. There's talk about a label, a front of package label coming from Chile, the PAHO label. That will be a technical barrier to trade. It will disrupt the entire region. Sit down, let's have a discussion with the private sector as to what's done in other markets. We want to create a label for us. We need a special label. Come on, EU, all these other markets. Petrotrin ownership. We are very happy that that move was made. When we said transparency, we said just make sure the bill is paid. In fact, I would love to see the SWWTU take over the port. I'd love to see somebody take over WASA and let government focus on what they do best. When is 30% bigger than 100? When you sell a business that you're not making a good return on assets to, get cash, sell it to a private sector individual. Most private sector businesses generate higher return on assets than any government business can generate, maybe except for Cal now. But let's do that, and you will get more from the private sector than when you run it. That's when 30% is bigger than 100. This is the competitive index. It identifies some major gaps that we have. Again, let's sit down and work on them. Institutions, government responsiveness to change, we are 25%. We are 130th in the world. Let's work together to fix these gaps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel, for that business perspective on the national budget. We note your concerns on the VAT refunds, and Gabriel, we accept your offer of the tax amnesty. I also support your views on the TTRA, and I also look forward, thank you for your support. It's been a long, hard attempt at trying to set up this TTRA. And also, I'd like to remind the Chamber that its favorite example of Jamaica is now within an IMF standby arrangement, and with something that we are very far from. Okay. So, with that being said, I'd like to move on to the next panelist, my colleague, Permanent Secretary, Ms. Jacinta Bailey-Sobers, is a career public servant with more than 30 years of service in the public sector of Trinidad and Tobago. She is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Social Development, having been appointed to that position in February 2016. Mrs. Bailey-Sobers has a first degree in economics from the University of the West Indies and a master's in social policy and planning for developing countries from the London School of Economics. Please welcome Ms. Bailey-Sobers.
Thank you very much to my colleague, the Chair, Mr. Dan Paul, Dr. the Honorable Pete Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, and other ministers of government, my colleague permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries, other government officers of ministries, and also our partners in the private sector and the NGO sector, members of the media, good morning. I'm very pleased to have been asked to share on the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. I've been the permanent secretary for the past 4 years or so, but I've spent a lot of my public service career in the social sector, and I would say that it's really the soul of the nation, the Ministry of Social Development and the ministries that work in the social sector. And if we get it right, I'm very sure that we will solve some of the issues that I've heard in the economic sphere, because we will be able to ensure that our human base, our human capital base is maximized, and also that they are contributing to national development. So I think this is why it's so important for us to understand how we contribute in the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services and the rest of the public sector. Social sector, that is, sorry. Need some help here. Yes, so while I'm trying to get the technology working, just to say that over the years, we've had challenges in the sector, and we have been working on those challenges, primarily data collection, so that we are able to measure and to demonstrate how we are improving, and also in terms of implementation. We need the resources, I would say the human resources, to be able to implement at a better rate than we do. We also have challenges, of course, with respect to collaboration and understanding and knowing what we are doing in the sector, what everybody's doing, and we're working on that as we put mechanisms in place to ensure that the duplication is reduced. So over the last fiscal, which I would be focusing on, we have been working, that is the social sector and the ministry, with regard to implementing towards the short-term goals for the Vision 2030 framework. Of course, all the initiatives of the social sector are strategically aligned to the Vision 2030 development framework and also the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So for the fiscal and for the past 4 years, we have been working on these 7 short-term goals, and they're listed there. I don't have to go through them, but just to say that as a Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, we have been particularly working towards the social services delivery improvement, given that we have the biggest piece of the pie with respect to the social grants and the social safety net, and also we have been working towards the family being protected and supported, because you will agree with me that the family is indeed the base of the nation, that social base, that if we have dysfunctional families, the entire nation is going to be impacted negatively. So those are our areas of focus. Thank you, my colleague. Also, in the social sector, we have been working on the second theme of the Vision 2030, which is delivering good governance and service excellence. And for many of us, especially in the Ministry of Social Development, we recognize that our systems must be improved so that they can be more effective and efficient. And we are particularly working on some technological projects, such as our integrated social enterprise management system, and also the processes and procedures in our important divisions such as the social welfare division. We are also aware that across the sector, in the Ministry of Education in particular, and also in the Office of the Prime Minister, that they are working on various systems to improve the way that we deliver our services, and we are also working together on these projects to maximize efficiencies. So those are the short-term goals. Going to our next slide, I thought I would share with us today on the allocations which have been given to the key social sector ministries, and this is in keeping with the trend over the years, education and training getting the biggest piece of the pie at 7.548 billion, health at 6.084, housing following, social development also high up with 4.969, community development, sport and youth affairs. Just to indicate, they're not there, but other ministries which will contribute to the social safety net and the sustaining of the social development floors would be Office of the Prime Minister, Public Utilities and National Security. Continuing with the trends, just to show you graphically, and I know usually the Ministry of Finance will lead with their graphs and so on, but the social sector, we are also there in our social sector investment program. We also show the trends, and we are working towards ensuring that we can collect the data to be able to show what is the outcome of the investment in the social sector. Just to indicate that as we see in fiscal 2020 allocations, the trend over the years has been between 33 to 37% of the national budget going towards the social sector, which is pretty high even in the region in terms of sustaining social development. So I think we've done very well in that area. And we continue to do so that we can actually maintain the gains that we have made in human development in spite of the reduction in revenues and the growth patterns that we have seen over the past few years. And as growth increases, we expect that we will be able to maintain these expenditures in the social sector. Again, just a pictorial view of the allocations towards the key social sector ministries, giving us a picture also of the major grants and the fact that over the years, and particularly for 2018-2019, that the expenditure has been sustained for CPEP, the Disability Assistance Grant. GATE has also been sustained so that we are able to build our human capacity, our human resource can be built up in terms of the education and qualifications. Also in the area of the OJT, and we recognize that there was some increase this fiscal with respect to the remuneration and also the numbers, and also the senior citizens pension always being maintained over the years to ensure that our older persons, that they are well taken care of. Just to show that of the 4 main grants under the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the social senior citizens pension always taking the biggest piece of the pie, but also followed very closely by the disability grant, the public assistance grant, to ensure that our vulnerable citizens are able to actually be sustained and have sustainable livelihoods. Just to mention that the Ministry of Social Development, recognizing that to build a resilient nation, which is what we are focusing on, and we could go to the next slide, that while we are maintaining the expenditure in these areas and on the grants that are for the vulnerable, that we also have to work on the issue of the dependency syndrome, which we have spoken about. So at the ministry, of course, we are working towards the implementation of of new mechanisms such as the Step Up, which is a program that would treat holistically with the family so that you don't only come in for a grant, but as you come in, you are diagnosed, you are assessed to ensure that the rest of the family, they are built up. So we have a number of indicators in a number of areas, in the area of health, in the area of education, in the area of documentation. So you have a family where the children do not have their birth certificates and so on, and we understand how that could impact for their future. We ensure that the family have all the documentation for their children, and also the education, the level of education among the young people in that household is at a level where they will be able to find a job and sustain themselves. So we are working on the dependency aspect. We recognize that it is a problem. Sometimes you work through with an individual who is on a grant, and you get them to the place where they get employment, and in 3 weeks they are back at your door because they want the grant. So we need to deal with it, and unless we do that, we will not be able to sustain the level of expenditure that we have to give towards these grants every year. So recognizing this and recognizing that we need a sustainable population, we are also working to ensure that those kinds of programs are implemented in other programs and ministries in the sector. Moving along, just to give a snapshot, and some of this was given before, in terms of the new initiatives in the budget, the housing construction program for small and medium-sized contractors at a fixed price, which is under Housing and Urban Development. Housing loan initiative, providing low-interest loans for up to $300,000. Of course, being in the Ministry of Social Development, as I indicated, and having oversight on the big picture of the social sector, we have lots of persons coming into the ministry in terms of requests for housing. Sometimes they feel that our ministry can assist, and we understand that the issue of housing is a huge one. So we are also working with the Ministry of Housing, and we will see a little later on that we will be putting on our agenda, the ministry, the social housing policy, which is an important policy to treat with a number of our vulnerable clients who would not be able to benefit from some of those initiatives, but we will want to ensure that they do have adequate, safe housing. Moving on, the daycare centers to cater for children under 3 years was also mentioned in the budget statement. Shelters for homeless females, which would be established by the HDC. Of course, we will be working with them, and I am sure other ministries in the sector. And I'm happy to see that with support from the business community, because we recognize too that the private sector can assist even in these social sector areas, and the establishment of the Cure Violence program with pilots in 16 communities in East Port-of-Spain, targeting those highest at risk of being perpetrators and victims of violent crime. And some years ago, I remember there was one study trying to put a cost to crime. And I recall when the study was completed, I'm not sure if it was made public, but the cost of crime, as we could all agree, is very high. So any program to treat with especially young persons and setting them on a path that will be more productive is always welcomed by us at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Just moving on quickly, some other initiatives that were mentioned, and some of these were already gone before, so I'll just mention those that were not mentioned, and that is the removal of the life certificate process for senior citizens. Although it was, I just want to indicate in our ministry in particular, we have close to more than 95,000 senior citizen pension clients. And we are working to ensure that this year they do not have to come in to indicate that they are alive. And I'm happy to say too that we have been working with the Attorney General's office the Registrar General, and we now have an MOU with that office to ensure that once persons die, that we get the information electronically and we take the persons off our system right away. So as we work with that particular system, and we have some other systems that we need to connect with, we are trusting that at the end of fiscal 2020, all our senior citizens will no longer have to come in to our offices, and that has a cost also to them to indicate that they're still alive and eligible for the benefit. Just to share with you some of the initiatives of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. The Social Mitigation Plan was approved in 2018, and this plan is really to cushion the impact of the downturn in the economy on the vulnerable, to ensure that there is some support there for them, and we have been moving forward with our stakeholders in the sector to implement that very important plan. One of the most recent initiatives with respect to this plan is that we would have gone out to 6 communities in the South region, which would have been impacted by retrenchment, to bring support with a joined-up government approach to them. We had the Ministry of Labour with their 10-point plan, Ministry of Education was there, Ministry of Public Utilities. We came together and we impacted those communities for their benefit. So this is the way that we will be working as we move forward, very collaboratively, very innovatively, to meet the needs of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. For fiscal 2020, these are just a few of the innovative new projects that will be done across the ministries, and I guess I'm being asked to wind up. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to say as I close, I just wanted to indicate one thing, that in the ministry and across the sector, we will be focusing on some very important areas, one of which will be the transformation of our values, attitudes, and behaviors in Trinidad and Tobago, so that we will be able to attain first world status. Unless we deal with that area, we will not be able to meet some of our goals and objectives as a nation. So thank you very much again for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Jacinta. I think what is critical here is that Trinidad and Tobago, like every other emerging economy, should avoid at all costs becoming a welfare state. As the Prime Minister stated very articulately recently, we should not take these social services for granted. I think what is key is that we avoid or eliminate intergenerational dependencies, so we can wean people off where possible in an orderly fashion, wean people off these programs to avoid that type of dependency. So thank you again, Jacinta. Let's move right along to the next speaker, another Permanent Secretary colleague of mine, Sonia Yearwood. Sonia is a career public servant with over 20 years experience. She's currently the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Works and Transport. Sonia has a BSc in Economics and a master's degree in Aviation Management from the University of the West Indies, and a master's degree in the implementation of development projects from the University of Manchester. Please welcome Sonia Yearwood.
The Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I've always wanted to say the full name. The Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance. The Honorable Senator Rohan Sinanan, Minister of Works and Transport. all other cabinet ministers, permanent secretaries, head of state companies. I must recognize the staff of the Ministry of Works and Transport who are here, media colleagues. Good morning. So, I'm here to speak on the projects and programs of the Ministry of Works and Transport. Now, in the Ministry of Works and Transport, we have a saying that we touch the lives of every citizen in Trinidad and Tobago. Are you clicking for me, colleague? Yes, all right. We touch the lives of every citizen in Trinidad and Tobago. Historically, we've been charged with the jurisdiction of coastal erosion, drainage, bridges, roads and highways, traffic management, construction of buildings, air and sea, ports, maritime and aviation regulation, and public transport. It's a bit of a mouthful. In 2019, just to give you an overview, we were provided with approximately 1.3 billion in our public sector investment program. And for 2020, approximately the same thing. There are times when we do feel a little like Oliver Twist. We come to the Ministry of Finance and we keep saying more. One of the things that we have learned to do, and this is a mantra that the Minister has placed at our doorstep, is that we must do more with less. But we have been ably provided for by the Ministry of Finance. So, what I'm going to do in the time allotted is just to provide an overview of some of the major project areas. Now, I was told 15 minutes, and based on the wide section of projects that we have, that's a bit of a challenge. The good thing is that the Minister of Finance helped me out ably in his speech, so there are some areas that you may have heard before. So I'll start with the Solomon Huchoy Highway extension to Point Fortin. This is the construction of a 29-kilometer, 4-lane divided highway from Dumfries roundabout to Dunlop with a connector from Mondesir. In that project, you have 4 interchanges, 3 overpasses, and 3 river bridges. The project consists of 12 work packages which have all been awarded to date. That is this phase of the project. And as was stated by the Minister of Finance, there is quite a lot of work being undertaken in that area. The next slide simply gives you an indication of some of the packages that have already been completed. If you look to the following slide, it shows you where the different packages are actually located and just identify some of the project benefits and impacts, which would be to improve the efficiency of the road network in the southwestern areas of Trinidad, improve road access and connectivity to Debe, Pinal, Siparia, Faizabad, Labrie, and Point Fortin, as well as San Fernando, Gulf City, and Laramine. In the main, it is really to facilitate the economic development of the southwestern region of Trinidad. We move on to the next project, which is the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway extension to Sandy Grande. This has been done on a phased basis. The first phase is a 14-kilometer segment starting from Kumuto Junction to Toko Main Road, and this phase will consist of 11 separate work packages. The second phase is a 6.25 kilometer from the existing Churchill-Roosevelt Highway to Kumuto and will consist of 3 separate work packages. The next slide just gives you a view, for those of us who can't go down there ourselves, of the work that has already been completed. On this highway, to date, we've identified that approximately 285 jobs have been created. The estimated cost is 2.27 billion, and expected completion is in January 2025. Our next project is the construction of a first-class road from Valencia to Toko. That project involves a hybrid approach. Okay, that project really, that's a hybrid approach in that there are some areas where we'll be upgrading the roadway my clicker assistant has gone far ahead of me. I think he's trying to tell me I'm talking too slowly. So one of the things, though, that we pride ourselves at the Ministry of Works and Transport is ensuring that we have redundancies. It's a good thing I have it on paper as well. So I am back at page 11. Thank you. See how far you went? Right. This is where we were. So this is a hybrid approach, right? And the proposed roadway project has been divided into 10 segments. It will span a total length of 40 kilometers from Ojo Connector Road in Sangre Grande to Toko Bay, and will include both connector and adjacent roads. When we say hybrid, we mean that some segments will constitute widening and rehabilitation works, while others will constitute new construction. Right, okay. I can understand why you had a little problem. So the next slide just gives you the estimated costs at 3.12 billion and expected completion in 2021. Some of the benefits will be reduced travel time, increased potential for economic activity in general and local tourism, expansion of cottage industries, provision of a smooth riding surface, improved drainage, and improved sight distances. Next project is our Moruga Road Rehabilitation Project. This will extend from Pitikaf in the north to Marak Village, Moruga in the south. The project is really to upgrade the access to the fishing port and processing facilities in accordance with the wider vision for that area. Port of Spain East-West Corridor Transportation Project. Well, that, of course, in this aspect, what you're seeing there is the Curab interchange, which we've spoken about prior. It is expected that this project will continue to other interchanges as we move along to Piaco and further on. This is supposed to be completed by February 2020 at an estimated cost of 221 million. I won't say anything more about the cost because the cost has been ventilated prior. The Diego Martin Overpass. This project benefits include upgraded transportation facilities to accommodate current and future growth in the Western Peninsula, to improve connectivity, provide access to new developments, and improve roads safety and network efficiency. This is an overview of the project. We are at the stage of negotiations are ongoing with the preferred bidder for the design-build contract through the National Infrastructure Development Company. This is a project schedule basically identifying the different aspects of work expected to be undertaken. The Chaguanas Traffic Alleviation Project. The phase 1 of this project was opened in June 21st, 2019 at a cost of 9.28 million. And it consists of new traffic alternatives, and we have future phases planned, phase 2, 3, 4, and it aims to alleviate traffic congestion, improve the connectivity between east and west Chaguanas, provide alternative access routes, and improve infrastructure for faster and more efficient travel. Our Bridges Reconstruction Program. So this program consists of the reconstruction of 62 structurally deficient bridges on the highways network. We have it in 3 phases. The work has continued in 2019 on phases 1 and 2, and phase 1 commenced prior to 2015 and consists of 25 bridges in total. To date, 22 bridges were completed. Sorry, I didn't want anyone who saw their bridge not to get an ability to look at it. So these are just some before and after pictures. In phase 2, we have completed in 2019 5 bridges, and these are the examples here. And in phase 3, we expect to undertake 25 bridges. The award and design construction supervision contracts, they're scheduled to be awarded by the end of this month for the first 13 bridges. And construction work should actually start by second quarter of fiscal 2020. So far, we've estimated that we've created 1,284 jobs under this program. And we want to make the point as well that here we were able to pick up the direct jobs. We haven't picked up the indirect jobs that go with these projects. Every project we do, we automatically see the growth in the area in terms of employment, and not just for the contractor, but for the surrounding areas. Construction of the Toko Ferry Port. So this is to be the development of a modern, multi-purpose Toko Ferry Port facility, which will facilitate the provision of inter-island transportation for persons and passengers. It will also have a facility for the Coast Guard, and it will also be have facilities for yachts and arrival of tourists in the Toko area, and the provision of a modern fishing facility for the fisherfolk of the Northeast Trinidad. Currently, we are at the preliminary design and study stage. Geophysical surveys were completed in March 2019. The EIA is expected to be completed by December 2019, and we are anticipating that the CEC would be granted by May 2020, which would pave the way for us to be able to award a design-build contract by September 2020. The port is expected to be completed between 2022-23. We gave that range based on different approvals that we hope to get in certain time frames. The construction of a fishing port and associated facilities at Grand Chemin and Moruga. This facility will comprise of both an onshore component as well as an offshore component. The onshore component is being designed to accommodate 91 fishing vessels and will provide amenities that include locker rooms, engine repair rooms, the full suite of requirements. We expect approximately 50 fisherfolk of the Moruga area to benefit from new facility as the existing facility is inadequate. These are some architectural rendered drawings of what we hope it will be looking like. The port facility is envisaged to provide commercial and retail opportunities onshore, while berthing of marine vessels will occur a short distance offshore in keeping with the stipulations of the EMA. Detailed designs were completed for the marina in July 2019. The landside facilities were completed in July as well. The CEC for the landside facility was granted in August 2019. The landside facility, now you know in the Ministry of Works and Transport, right? We talk about landslides a lot. So landside and landslides. But the landside facility is expected to be completed by July 2021 and the marine facility by September 2023. Here we are just going to provide an overview of our critical coastal protection program. Now, in the Ministry of Works and Transport, we say that our coastal protection work and our drainage work are two of the most critical areas for us as we seek to deal with the impact of climate change in Trinidad and Tobago. So, the projects here address the impact of coastal erosion and coastal flooding at prioritized sites, comprising over 6,500 linear meters of coastline. At this point in time, the 9 projects that you see here are either practically completed or in an advanced stage. Some of the projects include the South Cocos Bay Shoreline Stabilization Works, which is 84% completed, Cap Deville Shoreline Stabilization Works, which is 17% completed, and we have projects in Matlot, Sanssouci, Cocos Bay, Quinam, Mayaro, and also we are working on the construction of a breakwater system at Magdalena. We also we've undertaken a shoreline management plan for Manzanilla Beach. These are just some of the pictures depicting some of the areas and the percentage completed. one of the things that we really would like to also bring out in terms of the coastal protection works is that we see these works as works that we must look at in an integrated fashion. Okay, I got it. Yes, I apologize. So basically, we want to make sure that we do the coast, we do the roads, and then we make sure we address the communities so that we have development of the communities along the coastline. San Fernando waterfront, we spoke. Right, okay, so our aspect of this highly needed project it deals with roadworks and also with coastal protection works, which we are undertaking. I will not go into details but this is just a pictorial representation of some of the works to be undertaken. A pure program of works. So over the period, we've undertaken approximately 525 projects across the country. Some of the major ones, some of the major completed ones, you will see identified. So we have some, right. And in fiscal 2020, we propose to commence another 300. Once again, we have some of the major projects, but I don't want my colleague here to, yes, drainage program of works here as well. We've done over 400 drainage projects. In last fiscal, we intend to undertake over 350 in this coming fiscal. These are just some areas. So, we've reached the slide that my colleague wants me to reach, the conclusion slide. I really want to say that in the ministry, we are seeking to address infrastructure in a long-term developmental manner. The major highway projects that you see here all come out of a national trunk road expansion study that was done, and we are seeking to develop them incrementally. So the approach we're using is a step-by-step process which creates interconnectivity. I also want to just let you know that these are some of the hard projects that we've been doing, but we also have a number of soft projects, as we like to call them sometimes, ICT projects. And next time we can talk to you about the new plans that we have in terms of the red light fixed penalty. And I see the Minister of Finance is telling me I need to stop. But I want to thank you because it has allowed us to just show you that the Ministry of Works and Transport continues to work because we understand the role that infrastructure plays in the development of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And I think Sonia pointed out how critical a country's capital program is generating employment opportunities and investment and overall economic activity. We move straight along to the next panelist, Ms. Franca Costello, who is the Director of Lifetime Roofing Limited. She sits as the Chairperson of First Citizens Trustee Services Limited and is the Director on the boards of First Citizens Bank Limited, First Citizens Investment Services Barbados Limited, and First Citizens Bank Barbados Limited. Ms. Costello is currently the President of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. She was a BSc in Business Administration and an MSc in Building and Construction Management. Please welcome Ms. Costello.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting TTMA, the Manufacturers Association, and myself to represent this very important industry. The Honourable Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honourable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, the Honourable Sort Young, Minister of National Security and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Honourable Minister Paula Gubiskun, Minister of Trade and Industry. Thank you very much for having me here today. Mr. Damble, how much time do I have? 10 minutes? Okay. The TTMA recognizes that suppressed oil prices have placed significant constraints on government's cash flows. and we want to work with government, and we continue to engage with government and relevant agencies to do what's right for all parties, business, government workers, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. TTMA appreciates the need to reduce expenditure and the necessity of raising revenues. In so doing, we are pleased that it is the manufacturing industry that the government has tagged to promote. The manufacturing industry accounts for 8% of the GDP and employs 10% of the working population. That is 60,000 people. That is 60,000 families that depend on the continuity of our business in this country. And we agree that when it comes to family, that is where it begins in strengthening the productivity, the work ethic, the quality of trading that is going to support business and this economy. We recognize our place in the economy as absolutely essential to maintaining stability, stimulating growth, and getting a sustainable economy back on track. Business appreciates the difficulty in managing reduced revenues, cutting expenditures, wrestling the labor environment, international disruption, and market pressures. Similar to government, business is experiencing the same. The cost of doing business is increasing, and the ease of doing business is slipping. Like government, we are intent on doing more with less. To collaborate with all sectors and state agencies, the fight is not amongst each other, but it is out there, and we are intent on working not just with government, but with all sectors across Trinidad. And so, as Mr. Loquan said in his speech, we are moving towards stronger collaboration with the upstream energy sector. And TTMA in the last 6 months has already expanded out our membership 6%, 1/3 of that being connected to the upstream and downstream sector. And we applaud De Novo, who is our first upstream member of the manufacturing industry, indicating their support and recognition of the importance of integration with the downstream. It is to this end that the Minister of Finance acknowledgement of the manufacturing industry's struggles and our strategy to overcome them, that we know together we will overcome it. Allow me to digress into the philosophy of TTMA's wish list. Every recommendation made took into context that the government's cash flow has been contracted. And I'm not going to go into all of our wish list because it was 18 pages long. My apologies, Minister of Finance. But foreign exchange, for example, the Exim Bank facility, which was launched in May 2018, has provided some relief to the manufacturing industry. And the allocation of the $100 million in 2018, I am confident will have a direct impact to the manufacturers when the full 100 million comes to fruition. And I am proud of the Exim Bank in their collaboration with TTMA to say that we challenged Exim Bank to allocate 50 million to 50 companies by the end of 2019. And they took that challenge, and to date they have allocated 15 million to 40 companies. So I would like to applaud Exim Bank in their efforts towards that. In stimulating FX earnings, TTMA recommended a model called the Incremental Foreign Exchange Earnings Tax Credit. This incentive rewards FX earnings on an incremental base and is not exclusive to foreign earnings, but inclusive to domestic earnings. By reducing corporation tax based on an incremental earning, this means no money is out, no cash is out from the government towards this simulation, and it stimulates revenue and FX earned. This means that more FX would be repatriated to the system through declarations, an incentivized declaration. The cash flow of the VAT refunds. Minister of Finance, I'd like to thank you for your continued recognition of how difficult this has been on the manufacturing group. The refunds have been on the business. This lack of repatriation of the cash flow to the business is mostly affecting small to medium enterprises, as the larger industries can sustain a waiting period, but the small to medium enterprises are the ones that are being hit the hardest here. And I'm not sure that they can potentially survive a 5-year waiting period to be able to claim on that bond. And so we recognize your $3 billion bond as a creative stopgap measure, and we agree that the system works when both sides are compliant to timing of payment. We also recognize the bill has grown outstanding of current available revenue side. This is why the TTMA in our wish list urges the consideration of a net-off adjustment to the policy, even if it is just for a period of time until the account is rebalanced. The cost of doing business. Businesses are paying 30 cents on the dollar in taxes, and we estimate that we pay 20% of the tax bill. We, the TTMA, are enthusiastic to have the TTRA implemented. We do believe that this transformation in how taxes are collected will make all the difference in broadening the tax net. And Gabe from our chamber went into this in detail, and this is where politics must be put aside. This is not about supporting any one political side. This is about doing what is right for the industry, what is right for economy and for the country. The TTRA is needed to make the entire country tax compliant, and we cannot continue to rely on those that are compliant. And as Gabe said, we cannot penalize those who are compliant, allowing others to run free. The ease of doing business. The people of TNT are very much responsible here for our work ethic. As owners of businesses, employees, state agency workers, we owe it to our country to do better. We see the government making changes to reduce bureaucracy in simple ways, and no change should be smited. Every little change towards improvement and doing something best is an improvement. So removing the forms at the airport, I absolutely applaud this, and I say congratulations to the government for instituting that. Moving towards digital systems and implementing technology. We would like to press the government to dig a little deeper, though, into the industrial relations reform and agencies that businesses heavily rely on, such as customs, port, chemistry, food and drug division, and training agencies, and we ask for greater productivity and efficiency in these agencies, because the inefficiencies that businesses are experiencing here have a true net effect on our bottom line. The good news is that TTMA's manufacturing strategy is focused on private sector initiatives, intent on doubling the export of non-oil and gas goods by 2025. And this was challenging for the private sector. In our strategic groups and our focus groups, every time that we came against what was stymiting progress in the economy, it was easy to fall back and say, well, the government needs to fix that, and the government needs to fix that. But we challenged the private sector stakeholders that was in our focus groups, and we came up with key initiatives that are going to move the needle, and we will do our part. But we recognize that with the collaboration of the government and the support of the government, that we will have a true impact on this economy. And so we welcome the government's collaboration with us, and we say thank you again, Minister of Finance, for recognizing our strategic approach. Our top 5 export products are iron, cereal and flours, alcohol, paper, and non-alcohol beverage. Those are our export products. Of that, iron accounts for 3 billion, and the total is 6. Our top 5 export markets are the USA, Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados, and Grenada. The mission is to move our 3 billion export because we're considering iron and outliers, so we're focusing on the other top 4. The 3 billion export value to 6 billion by 2025 by building the SME and entrepreneur market up. Focus on our rising stars and established markets. TTMA's strategy is centered on 7 pillars: supply, infrastructure, labor, technology, innovation, capital, demand. Each pillar has a start and an end point. We know that with the government's support, this will happen. It has to happen. And you have our support because our interests are genuinely aligned to make Trinidad and Tobago the place for local reinvestment and foreign direct investment to set up shop. At the President's dinner this week, I acknowledged that 2019 is the 50th anniversary that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And I'd like to close with this because I believe it resonates very strongly. On this auspicious occasion, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, a capsule was left with 73 messages left in it. And amongst President Eisenhower, Nixon, kings, queen, and the Pope at the time, the father of our country, Dr. Eric Williams, left a message that is rated top 10 best in the world. You know, they say Trinis are everywhere, so we're on the moon as well. And Dr. Eric Williams' message was, the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago acclaim this historic triumph of science and the human will. It is our earnest hope that while we gain the moon, we shall not lose the world. Manufacturing is our world. Oil and gas will return to its buoyant state. It is the nature of the industry. It fluctuates. So it is my hope that while we seize the opportunity today to build up the manufacturing industry by creating an enabling environment for business, and we do not fall back to the heavy reliance on the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
On a personal note, I'd like to thank yourself and the TTMA for your annual submissions of ideas and recommendations to assist us in the preparation of the national budget. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this segment of today's proceedings, and now we'll have a Q&A session in which the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance will join the panelists.
Thank you all very much for being a very attentive audience thus far. Just give us a few seconds as we make room for the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance to join the panelists on stage. As you all would have recognized by now, we have run a little over time, so the decision has been taken that we'll ask the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance to join the panelists, and we'll just have 1 hour of questioning at this stage, and I will be your moderator to manage that hour. When you come to the mics, we ask that you ask your question after identifying yourself and the area or business or sector that you've come from. Right, audience, at this stage, I'd like us to just thank our panelists for their contributions over the last hour or so, and we step into the question and answer stage. So this is your opportunity to now ask the panelists who've been joined by the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance questions. Going once, going twice. All right, there are 4 microphones spaced throughout the audience. I'm being told not to beg you all for questions. Well, you all just go ahead and engage. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm a former public servant who continues to do public service. And this question
Did you have to tell us your name?
Oh, sorry. My name is Winston Rudder.
Thank you, Mr. Rudder.
My question is directed to the head of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister, who was my former minister in a former life. We have heard a lot of discussions very important to the 2020 budget. I would like to hear from the Prime Minister what specific initiatives, in addition to what we have heard, if any, to ensure the kind of coherence and coordination across the public sector, including the state parastatal organizations, to ensure the delivery on what we have heard for the 2019-2020 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Rudder. Prime Minister.
Coherence to the number of disparate sections that we mentioned is brought largely from a ministry which has not been mentioned in the conversation much. There is a ministry in the government called the Ministry of Planning and Development, and that ministry's role is to coordinate. And as a matter of fact, in managing the government on a daily basis, we meet together, Prime Minister's Office, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning and Development, and any other relevant minister. And we usually start the week, Monday morning, at the Prime Minister's residence on that basis, so that we plan identified by individual ministries. It would be anchored somewhere in the Ministry of Planning and Development, and there's that collaboration. So that is there. The government is a continuum, literally feeding off the work of the Ministry of Planning and Development, which actually feeds into the budget. The budget documents begin with the work of the Ministry of Planning and Development and ends with the Ministry of Finance. Is that correct? Which is why the Minister of Planning and Development is alleged to have told the Minister of Finance this morning to mention her presence.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I thought you were walking to the mic. Our second question. Okay, as we've condensed the time for questioning, it also will include the opportunity for any members of the media who are present to also ask their questions. Of course, we want to keep it restrained to the budget conversation. Yes, please, sir. Identify your name and where from.
Good day, everyone. Gregory Kova, Second Vice President of the PSA. And it's two things. One is a comment and then the question.
All right, but we're trying to keep it to questions, but go ahead, sir.
But the comment is simply this. I have observed that the moderator for the panel, when identifying persons, would have mentioned career public servants reaching to the pinnacle of being the CEO of particular ministries. And what we have observed within recent times is that the advertisement of having deputy PS enter into the society of a career public servant coming from a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago defeats that purpose. So very soon, you will not be able to say, Honorable PS, career public servant, having 30 years service, that kind of thing. That is the statement. But the question is, the job of being a minister, member of parliament, even that of being Honorable Prime Minister, is temporary by nature in the context of it is dependent on the public voting for you all. But the job of a public servant, by nature, is a permanent job. So the question is, why does the administration continue to populate the public service with contract jobs? The PSA posits that the question of any job of a continuous nature must, by definition, be a permanent job. So we'd like to ask the question, could we have a reversal of the trend for the last 15, 20 years of populating the public service with temporary contract jobs, as evidenced by the new judiciary, the new TTRA, the new Institute of Statistics?
Understood. Understood. Thank you.
Let me answer that. The public service is quite large. And what we have seen by experience is that if we confine ourselves to persons coming up in the system as the only source of leadership in the public service, that the country is deprived of the wider national community's talent. That's the first thing. And secondly, the pathway towards stopping the public service like permanent secretaries, we would have found that you end up, as we have right now, in a situation where you may not have the spread of skills. We ended up at one stage with a whole lot of permanent secretaries who were largely HR specialists, whereas before, a lot of permanent secretaries came up as directors of departments and so on, and ended up as permanent secretaries who would have known the public service. And thirdly, management as a skill is not confined only to the public service. The public service needs managers, and sometimes you may find that that spread of management skill is not available by simply just coming up as filling a vacuum in the public service. So we have about, I'm advised by the Minister of Finance, it's only about 10% of the public service that is in the contract arrangement. And in fact, some people, they prefer to be in contract arrangements because they can move in and out. So that flexibility is not a bad thing. But we still have a permanent public service of about 90% of the bodies that are in the public service.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Wilson.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Wilson. This is a question to the Minister of Finance. Minister, you said that NIF 2 will be a reality in the 2020 fiscal year, barring unforeseen circumstances. What are those unforeseen circumstances?
So by definition, unforeseen means you can't see, Mr. Wilson.
Not at all. I have two other questions. Should I ask them now or should I?
Okay, go ahead.
No, I can answer. Do I have the mic?
Yes.
By definition, you don't know what unforeseen circumstances are. But the point is that it's not been easy to unravel the assets held by Clico Investment Bank, CL Financial, and so on. There is a major asset there that we've been working on for a very long time, and that is Methanol Holdings International. And we've had quite a lot of difficulty in consolidating the majority ownership of that block of shares. We succeeded, so that we're going forward with that as the major foundation of NIF2, barring unforeseen circumstances, such as litigation, arbitration. These things just come out of nowhere. But we've been working on it very carefully for the last couple of years.
Minister, secondly, you said that the government has collected $15 billion from Clico, and that amount, quote, excludes the funds which will be received from the sale of the traditional portfolios. Was the reference to the receipt of funds an error?
No.
In which case, how much funds do you expect to receive?
You mean from the sale of the traditional portfolio? That's the question?
Yes.
I think you should direct that question to the central bank. I want to make it very clear. The central bank has control over Colonial Life. Under the amended legislation that came into force in the 2009 to 2010 period, the central bank was given the authority to take over an insurance company in a manner that it did not have before. The central bank has had Clico under supervision now since then, and that's about 10 years. And the point the central bank has made to me as Minister of Finance is that it is not the business of the central bank to run an insurance company. And they have put that matter out for tender. They've gone through a very rigorous evaluation process, stretching over a period of years, and it is the central bank that is managing the sale of the traditional portfolio of Clico. I prefer you pose that question to them because, as you know, it's a litigious situation. So pose the question to the supervisor. I am not the supervisor of insurance companies.
But you have a certain measure of stewardship under Section 44F5 of the Central Bank Act.
Yes. When it's all said and done, I have to look at the public interest. That's the role of the Minister of Finance with respect to the Financial Institutions Act, the Insurance Act, the Central Bank Act. And I've made this point before, that the Minister of Finance is not a rubber stamp. So I have to look at the public interest. We've taken a very, very long time with the Central Bank with respect to that matter, a year, making sure that they provided the necessary justification for the pathway that they are on at this time. And eventually it will come to the Minister of Finance formally for the Minister to approve the sale of the traditional portfolio. But we're not at that point now. We're at the point where the central bank has selected a preferred bidder and they're going through the process with that preferred bidder. And as I said, I would prefer you pose the questions to them. I don't want to appear in an affidavit. Mr. Wilson.
Final question. Are you planning to make a proposal to the PSA and to the other public sector unions with regard to the outstanding salary issues?
The government has taken a decision that very shortly an offer will be made. But it's a government offer. It's not me making the offer. It's the government making the offer.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Members of the audience.
They seem to be very satisfied, Mr.
It has been a very... All right. Well...
Mr. Chairman, it might be an auction, going,
I know,
gone.
well... we should have just closed off here, Mr. Douglas. Please identify yourself, sir, and where you're from.
Okay, good day, folks. I'm Sean Douglas, Newsday. The environmental issues. We spoke about a ban on the import of the styrofoam, but what about locally made styrofoam? Is there going to be some curbing of use or encouragement to switch?
Is that your question, Mr. Douglas?
Well, that's the first part. Secondly,
let's answer that first, Mr. Douglas. I think that's very easily answered.
Imbert can answer that question.
I can answer. We've been working with the Ministry of Planning on this. They've been working with us over a year. Many of the manufacturers have actually re-engineered the inputs into their product in order to qualify, and they are being audited to ensure that they meet the environmental standards required.
I think what that means, if I may add, is there's a
very good
biodegradability that they've been working on for the past year. So the new styrofoam products that we've manufactured will meet the necessary levels of being biodegradable.
And that's under the guidance of the Ministry of Planning.
Okay. Secondly, we're talking about disposable bottles, single-use bottles being banned from the public service, and we saw the Speaker of the House kick the ball off. But what about the general public usage? What could be done? For example, the deposit. Let's say you put $1 deposit on everybody who buys a sweet drink, and then you have to return it to get back your $1 or the water bottle. Because this is beyond ridiculous, the state of our coastline and the recent flooding. So, any views there?
Well, if I may comment on this, we lived in this country very comfortably a long time ago before it was fashionable to be using the modern products. We grew up on solo bottles and gypsy bottles here as returnables, when the word returnable wasn't a fashionable word. But we all had glass bottles, or beverages were in glass bottles, and the bottles were deemed to be valuable to be returned and to be put back to use. And there's nothing to prevent us from going back there.
I think Mr. Farrier from the Chamber of Commerce would like to add.
What I can tell you is we have been having discussions with the Minister of Public Utilities and with the Ministry of Planning, and a number of, in fact, we had a stakeholder meeting, I think it was last year, where we brought in all importers, all retailers, all manufacturers, and we are working, we expect to be seeing the draft bill shortly, which will be a beverage container bill. And I think one of the things I wanted to talk to government about is that as opposed to reacting to a beverage container bill by putting a bill in, there's an opportunity, and the opportunity is we have diminishing raw materials. We can actually recycle that and create post-production, post-consumer product that can be used to the benefit of the country. We are working with the various ministries, and I expect that early next year, I know someone said this year, but I don't know if that's this year. Oh yes, that's true. It is at the Attorney General's office now, I understand. Very true, Attorney General. So it is at the Attorney General's office. It will come out for consultation, and we will work collaboratively, and all stakeholders recognize we must do something positive in dealing with this. I think the one thing we want to do is change the mindset of just collecting and throwing away. We want to look at creating a post-consumer, post-production production.
I'd like to add to that to say that the manufacturers are very much in support of this. So when it does come for collaboration, it will be expedited. It's not going to be stalemated at the manufacturing and where it is being transformed into the public. So we are very much in support of this, and the same way that as you feel, remember we are citizens as well, and we feel the same when we see the littering and the flooding happening as a result too.
Thank you.
I just had another sort of concern about I'm not sure what word to use, but the people at the very bottom who we're talking about street dwellers, we're talking about youth at risk, very crazy situation of people found in cages. It's a very general situation, but I think it needs to be stated.
Sean,
it needs to be a philosophy.
Mr. Douglas, what is the question? Sorry.
Right. Well, does the government have an underlying philosophy of protecting the marginalized, such as the children who could be helped by a little sports rather than smoking weed on the block? the countless vagrants, let's not call them socially displaced persons.
All right.
It's raw, it's rough. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. I think we understand the question.
But do we have a philosophy? Yeah, does a government have an underlying thrust? Because we can't rise if a lot of us are...
All right, Mr. Douglas, we're trying to decipher what the question is, and let me try and help you out here. I understand you to be asking whether the government has a philosophy, i.e. a policy, to deal with those who may be marginalized, is the word you use in society, in particular the youth and the young people who may be engaging in activity that is not a positive nature. The simple answer to that, and I'll let the Prime Minister add and expatiate or whoever wants, is yes. As has been happening, and as you've heard the Ministry of Social Development discuss and talk about, and we all know that in the country there are a number of programs that address this, including from national security. Prime Minister, is there anything to add?
Well, we have a whole ministry that's dealing with that.
Correct.
And it's not just sport, it's all aspects of youth development.
Correct.
And if we had the time today and we had a broader panel, you would have been impressed by the Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs, who would have been telling you what we are actually doing in that particular area. But we share your concern, and it forms part of the National Work Program.
Is it time to initiate an inspector of homes or some sort of ombudsman for, if it's children's homes, we're talking about women's shelters, or
Mr.
the most
Douglas
recent case?
All right, Mr. Douglas, as I tried to explain very clearly at the outset, we're keeping it to the budget discussion. That was something that was actually addressed yesterday at a press conference where the Minister of Health and the Minister of Social Development and Family Services were present along with myself. The simple answer is yes, where there is legislation dealing with certain areas, the legislation is to be enforced. The Ministry of Health has a role to play, as does Social Development. And I was pleased to hear yesterday they have been doing the work in that area. For example, with the homes for the elderly, they've inspected over 200 plus homes, almost 300. So even though we've invited questions, I'd ask that you ask your last question.
On the budget.
On the budget.
On the budget.
Well, I mean, okay, the last one would have really been the 6,000 housing units within a year, which is great, but can it be done?
Well, it's the target, right? If you aim for the sky, you don't make it to fall in the clouds, it's still way above the ground.
Thank you very much. All right, this is the last opportunity for any questions in the room. Going once. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, I'd like to, I guess we wrap up the panel side of it and the question and answer side of it. And it was to provide the Minister of Finance with the opportunity, it being a Ministry of Finance production on Spotlight on the budget, to just share with us his closing words. You could do it from right there.
Certainly. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for attending at rather short notice. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone who in any meaningful way or any small way is part of the process of building this country. We've had a very difficult 4 years. We're coming out of it. It's still not the best situation. We're still running a deficit budget. But what we have tried to do last year and this year is start to give back to the population. The first 3 years were very difficult. So we had to, as I said, increase taxes in certain areas, reduce the fuel subsidy, and so on. But last year's budget and this one are geared towards giving back to the population. NIF is a perfect example of that, where we gave these bonds at 4.5%, 5.7%, 6.6%. You're not going to get that in the bank. And soon we'll be coming out with housing bonds as well, again at 4.5%. It's a perfect investment for your money. So that we as a government, we are very happy to be with you here this morning. We're very happy that the members of the panel could join us, the Chamber of Commerce, the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association, the two permanent secretaries, Mr. Loquan, the hardworking Mr. Loquan, from National Gas Corporation, the Prime Minister, of course, the Honorable Prime Minister. And we're really happy to be able to get this opportunity in a different forum to explain the budget measures, because the Parliament has its rules, its strictures. As I said at the beginning, you're not allowed to display photographs or charts or things of that nature in the Parliament. This is an opportunity to give a different perspective to the budget and to illustrate the budget measures, what we are doing as a government, and how we're reaching out and doing our best to help the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you very much for coming. I think it's been a very successful session this morning, and I look forward to your continued support. I'm particularly pleased at the interventions from the Chamber and the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association with respect to their support for the Revenue Authority in particular and some of our environmental measures. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister of Finance. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings today's official proceedings to an end. I see there was an opportunity for some networking, so who wants to stay behind can stay behind and do your networking. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Cabinet colleagues, and everyone who participated and contributed to making today a very successful one. We just ask the Prime Minister to leave.